Books. I'm not 30 seconds late. My clock still, my computer says 7:29, so I'm slightly early. So now it says 7:30. So hello everyone who's here already. I have a coffee, I have a water, and I seem to have developed a squeaky chair. That's going to irritate, but at the same time I'll probably keep doing it because of the sound. So those of you who find this interesting, helpful, whatever, feel free to give it a thumbs up at some point. If you're not a subscriber and you think, oh, I'd quite like to be subscribed, feel free to subscribe. Obviously, I've been here for about 10 minutes doing stuff, but I've been here for about 10 minutes between making coffee and things. So I have been following your conversation. Yeah, I can't put the mic closer to the chair because the mic's attached to the computer. But yeah, so I don't know why it's squeaking. I don't have WD-40. So today, keep squeaking. I obviously thought that I would talk about gene expression, mind, body healing. Yeah, I was spying. I was wondering, I wonder if they feel watched here. Yeah, I was watching just sort of, obviously, like some of you guys do, I opened my computer and got on the right page and everything, made sure it was all looking like it was going to work for me, and had it all set up ready to go so that I could just press go live once I was ready. But that meant that obviously once every time I popped in this room, I could see the chat. So there's two kind of subjects that I find very interesting. There's lots of things I find very interesting, but there's two therapy type of areas that I find interesting. One is around social psychology and non-conscious responses. So when people say to me they want to learn to be hypnotherapists, what books do I recommend and what videos do I recommend? I always recommend the books and videos that have nothing to do, on the surface at least, with hypnosis, because I feel that hypnosis books are pretty rubbish in most cases for the kind of information that you need and the level of research that you want the book to contain. So I go to books on behavioral activation, non-conscious responses, things like that. So that's one area that I find fascinating. And another area is mind-body therapy. So the way that the genes can be influenced and made to express. I'll talk about this all a little bit more detail in a minute, but they're the two areas that I find really interesting. They kind of overlap because both of them are to do with non-conscious processes and to do with behaviors and things, but they're both from sort of different areas of science. So yeah, so they're the two sort of things that when people say what books do I recommend, I talk about. I'm looking up to try and see the names of the books because I can never remember the names. I talk about books by people like John Barr, and I've got books like the Oxford Handbook of I'll go and grab them rather than have you stare at my crooked neck. As you can probably hear, they're big books. So, back on the screen. Yeah, that's the trouble. The titles The sort of books I read, um, now as an author, I've got books on how to write books, how to publish books, how to do the marketing. Everything says to come up with a reasonably short title that's catchy, easy for people to remember. And then the books that I actually choose to read pretty much have long titles that you can never remember, and they're not particularly memorable titles, even if they're not long titles. Um, well, restful day off. I did some bits of work. Abby did say she was happy for me to come and stream, but I said no, I'm refused to. So I didn't come and stream. But Abby did say that she was happy for me to be here. And I think I liked people's posts, and I think I commented on a few bits and pieces and stuff. So yeah, but other than that, I think Abby didn't do much for her birthday. So I think lots of people are going to be having birthdays once the current situation is over. So I've got things like the Oxford Handbook of Human Action. That's something I'd recommend. It's got my Cats Protection bookmark in. The New Unconscious. That's another one I'd recommend. Happy 40th. I remember turning 40 a couple of years ago, scarily. So yes, The New Unconscious, Social Psychology and the Unconscious, The Automaticity of Higher Mental Processes. Before You Know It, The Unconscious Reasons We Do What We Do, and Then a Miracle Occurs. So that's kind of so focusing on behavior in social psychological theory and research. I'm not even going to get it down because they're very big books. 2 handbooks of social psychology, volume 1 and volume 2. They're not handbooks. I've fallen asleep reading them, and when it hits you in the face, it really hurts. I have had that happen to me. So yeah, they're not what I would define as a handbook. In fact, most handbooks aren't what I would define as a handbook. So those books are all about how we do stuff non-consciously. So most therapy that you go to, I'm just trying to read what you're saying. Oh yes, most libraries are closed. That is a bit of a pain. What was I saying? Yes, most therapy focuses on kind of trying to consciously force yourself to change the way you are. Yeah, it'll be like try and change the way you think about this, or try and change the way you act in that situation. And but it's always kind of coming at it after the way the brain works. And cognitive behavioral therapy, even though the research says different, and cognitive behavioral therapy is very much a research based way of working, the theories that get taught about cognitive behavioral therapy are incorrect. They talk about thoughts triggering feelings and behaviors, etc., when the actual science shows that sensory information comes in, and that goes to the deeper parts of our brain, that filters up to the higher cortex, which is where you end up with your thoughts. So by the time you have the thought, you've already decided on whatever you're going to be doing. Yeah, you're already in motion, doing something, some action or some behavior or some, the thought is actually the result of a whole process of the way you've already decided you're going to respond. So when you try and change the thinking from that perspective, you're trying to change the thinking after your whole sort of being is almost saying, we're going to do this. So it's a bit late, and it makes it much harder to then change that thinking. Whereas if you think, okay, so the sensory information comes in, so the thought could be the next sensory information. So you could think, I'm going to fail at this. And now you get a feedback loop that I'm going to fail at this, makes you feel maybe scared or whatever, or I'm going to have a panic attack or whatever. And then because you're thinking I'm going to have a panic attack, you start feeling like you're going to have a panic attack. So you can get a feedback loop where that thought has now become part of the feedback loop. But the initial kind of triggers are all non-conscious. They all well up in you and work their way up to the thoughts, because that's from your higher cortex, not from the deeper parts of your brain. And so my reason for reading these books and for studying these topics, and my reason that I feel that therapists and people wanting to train in hypnotherapy, etc., should read these, is because it's all about how you non-consciously respond to things. So it's kind of saying, let's access that deeper part. And for example, if you read, which I think is a very good book, Then a Miracle Occurs, you'll read about things like, I'll see if there's a whole chapter on it. I think there might be. Implementation intentions. So implementation intentions are essentially what a hypnotist would say is doing self-hypnosis. So the idea of it is that you set up a way of thinking about it. So you'd say, for example, I pick a lot. If I find a hair that feels out of place or something, I've got to pick at it until I remove it. And obviously I then end up gouging marks into my face or whatever. And so I was reading the book and I thought to myself, I wonder if it will really work as easily as it says it works. And so I did exactly what it said in the book, not giving it much effort, just following what it said in the book, which is the sort of implementation intention process. So it's kind of saying, when this happens, I will do X, whatever that is. So I think I said something like, when I get the urge to pick, I'll ignore it. And hello, Abby. And I didn't think any more of it until a few days later, when I realized I hadn't actually picked at my face at all. And suddenly realized that it had worked that easily. So the idea is that you're setting up saying, when this event happens, I'm going to respond in this way. And by doing that, you're setting yourself up that it's going to happen before you consciously become aware of it. So you don't have to think, I'm going to put in some cognitive strategy for how not to pick when I start picking. Instead, you're not even starting picking, because you've set it up that when a part of you gets an urge to pick, another part of you just ignores it, so to speak. So I find that sort of area fascinating and under-researched. But a lot of the research ends up being a lot of the stuff you read is the same kind of stuff you would read in hypnosis research, but like many schools of science, the two don't seem to have researchers connecting the dots here. So that, obviously, I'm not going to be focusing on necessarily right now, but it is related because it's about communicating with the non-conscious part of you. It is related to what I thought I would focus talking about today on. So those who do have an interest in that, I definitely recommend that you buy it. Yeah, that was the And Then a Miracle Happened book. So I'd read about implementation intentions in research papers, which I'd already read. And then I found out that it was actually written in a book, and so I bought the book, thinking that way I can read more about it. And as part of reading more about it, obviously in a book, there's normally at the end, in the sort of books I read, there's normally at the end lots of references to other research papers that I've perhaps not read yet. So part of my reason, for example, of buying a book like this is that I then read the chapter in the book on that subject, but then obviously I can go through the references and literally go to every one of those references and read the references and learn even more about the subject. So you've got everything all in one place. It's a bit like, obviously, when you read a scientific paper itself, you often get loads of references you can go to and read even more. So that's kind of what I did. And I'd not actually really used it on myself until I decided, mid reading the book, I kept on picking while I was reading. And so I just thought, oh, I'll just quickly use this now. So it happened to be that I did that. Yes, Abby made herself some cakes the previous day. And I made some crisps today. But because it's to do with accessing non-conscious stuff, it's kind of linked to the topic for today. I'm just moving those over so I've got room, because I'm bound to be showing you books from behind me. So I think of the topic of today as being ideodynamic healing. So ideodynamic is just some kind of automatic process. You've got automatic sensory experiences, automatic feeling experiences, automatic cognitive experiences, automatic behaviors. So you've got all sorts of automatic kind of stuff that goes on and happens. And the idea of ideodynamic healing is that you're working with those ideodynamics, working with that automatic stuff that goes on. And so something I like about it is that you don't have to necessarily, for example, get content. You don't have to learn a lot as a therapist. You don't have to learn a lot about a client's problem. They can keep that problem private, keep it to themselves. You can ask exploratory questions and things that you don't need the answers to. What you want to know is that the client knows what it is they want to work on, that the client knows what it is they want to achieve. You don't have to know that as the therapist. So that's something I quite like about ideodynamic working. The other one is that most of what we think we know are normally assumptions. So I'm always teaching in therapy that you try never to ask a why question. The only time you would ask why is if you want an opinion. You don't ask why if you want to know why someone did something, because you'll get an opinion and that may not be the facts. So I almost never ask why when I'm talking to a client. I'll ask what, when, where, who, how, but not the why. And so what I'm always trying to do is get to the pattern of the problem and try and work with that pattern. So with ideodynamic working, the idea is that you're using some kind of automatic response, and you're essentially saying, you consciously may not know why you've got this problem. You may not know what caused it. You may have an idea. You may think you know, but you may not know what caused it. You may not know sort of, was it one event? Was it, for example, everything that has caused someone to be in therapy, there is a human being somewhere out there who's had something similar, or perhaps even a worse version of that, who hasn't needed therapy. And so even just saying, for example, well, I was hit by a car and that's why I'm traumatized, that could well be the case. But likewise, it could be, why is it that you were traumatized and not Joe Bloggs down the street who was hit by a car as well, and it didn't traumatize them? So you end up having that problem of, where do you track back to? Like, how do you decide at what point you're going to stop kind of delving into trying to find out the cause, if you're looking for a cause? So even doing that, and is the person likely to end up worse, or having a recurrence of the problem or whatever, because you haven't addressed whatever it was that is part of who they were that made it so that they had that response in the first place. So say, just using the car example, because obviously I've been through that one. um, Say you've been hit by something, you've become traumatized, and you're now not traumatized. Are you still more prone to becoming traumatized again from something or other in your life, because of the fact that you actually were prone to you became traumatized that once in the first place? um, so then you think, well, do you have to work on something else, so that you, like, for example, if someone has, say someone has multiple bouts of depression, and the depression has been treated every single time, they've managed to find a way through that and come out the other side of it. But the reality is that it keeps recurring. So what is it that makes it that when certain things happen, the person responds in that same kind of way, that although they can have on their own or have support or whatever to come out the other side, what is it that makes them just kind of have the way of thinking about things and behaving about things and feeling about things that makes them have that kind of response each time? So you end up kind of getting stuck on, you will never be likely to be able to know that. Therapists who claim to know better than you are lying. uh, Therapists uh, shouldn't be interpreting, not to you at least, shouldn't be interpreting their opinion of what they think your behaviors mean, their opinion of what you should or shouldn't do, or any of that kind of stuff. Their job isn't to be doing that. Their job is to be helping you move forward and helping, you're the expert on you. It's just that you don't necessarily know that you're the expert on you, because you're not outside of yourself. You can't get that kind of external look on your situation, and you can't access every bit of your upbringing and your patterns you've developed and all the rest of it. So the idea of working ideodynamically, and I've always preferred, even without working ideodynamically, I've psychodynamic therapy is generally something that is not something I would ever want someone to have, um, because of the fact that it's essentially replicating it's psychodynamic therapy is frowned upon in relation to using it for things like depression, for the fact that it promotes the thing that's causing depression. It promotes introspection and problem focus, and people who are depressed are very good at introspecting and focusing on problems, and it hasn't got them out of that cycle. What you want is forward moving therapy, therapy focused on helping you to know what it is you want, how you have to achieve that, and then how you can go about doing that. So no one form of therapy, as in like a school of therapy, really fits the bill, which is why most therapists work holistically and use multiple different bits of therapy. Because if you follow the scientific research, for example, there's bits that there's not one therapy that matches the scientific research. So just reading comments. So even before doing a lot of kind of can't even talk now. Even before doing a lot of ideodynamic working, I was doing a lot of therapy and working with children, families, doing parenting work, all sorts of different things. But the focus was always on, how can we help you to get sort of improve the situation and move forward and make lasting change. The focus wasn't on, obviously, the thing about the past is that the past has already happened. It's been and gone. It can't be changed. You can change your perspective of it, but you can't actually change it. And every time you recall a memory, you change that memory based on how you're recalling it in that moment. And so then when you next recall it, you're recalling the way it was remembered the last time you recalled it. So it gradually changes, or it can dramatically change sometimes over time. Um, and so a lot of my work, I would gather almost no information. So unless it was around, I need this information for child protection, safeguarding, all the usual kind of therapy reasons to make sure that people are safe and that no one's coming to harm, whether it's from domestic abuse or whether it's um, child abuse or anything like that. You would do all the safeguarding kind of questions, and you'd make sure that's information you do ask, whether the person likes it or not. Um, but generally, what I'd find is that the first session, the client has rehearsed what they think they're going to tell me. So they've rehearsed, right, I'm going to have to tell Dan this information and that information. I'm going to have to tell him about this incident that took place in that incident. And I'm going to have to say this about that. And I suppose I'm going to have to reveal how I was abused at that age, because he's going to want to know that. And then I wouldn't ask anything about any of that kind of information, because none of that is the information that I'm interested in knowing. So even before doing idiodynamic working, it would be rare, unless it was, as I say, relevant for safeguarding or anything like that, it would be rare that I would ask about most of what clients would expect me to ask. I'd be asking things like, if you woke up tomorrow and your problem magically had disappeared, how will life be different? How will you know that something has changed? What will be the first thing you notice when you wake up? How will you feel? What will you do that's different now? How will your life go differently? And I would have the whole session focused on conversations around how their life is going to be different, what it is they're going to be doing differently, what behaviors they'll be doing differently, the different ways they'll be. I'd talk about, like, if I could turn up the volume to your inner dialogue so I could hear it, what sort of things would you be saying to yourself differently? How would you be saying those things to yourself? What kind of tone of voice would you be using? What speed of speaking would you be using? What sort of things would you be thinking in your head? Would you be making pictures in your head? If you were, what kind of pictures will you be making that's different? What behaviors will you be doing? Like getting up, having a coffee, going and standing out at the back door, getting some fresh air, um, spending some time eating breakfast, stroking cats, whatever. So I would be finding out what is different about your day. I would then want to know, so tell me about, so I'd want to know if, so I always do scaling, 0 to 10. If 10 is the worst that things could be and 0 is the opposite, where are you now? And people would say 9 or 10 normally. Okay, so if, say they said 9, if you were an 8, how will things be different? If I'd asked you that question and you were an 8, what different things would you tell me? And so they'll then say something like, maybe they say, I wouldn't have worried so much through the day. And so I would then want the positive. Okay, if you're not worrying, what on earth are you spending your time doing instead? Well, I'll be focusing on this and I'll be doing that. So you get an idea of what the 8 is. And they say, okay, what if it was a 7? What's that? And then they tell you that. Then you say, where would you be happy with? So what number would you be happy to achieve? So if you're currently saying that you're, say, a 9, where would you like to be where you can say, if I was at that, that's where I would say I don't need therapy and I can do the rest of the journey on my own, kind of thing. So so you're trying to kind of look at, so for example, perfection isn't what someone should be striving for, because one thing about life is obviously that crap will always happen to you, and so you can't obviously avoid that. So what you want to know is, what is it that you think, and you don't want people in therapy all the time either. So you think, okay, what is it that would be the progress that you think, if I made that much progress, I'd be thinking, I don't need a therapist now. I can cope with this life compared to what I had. This is a breeze. And so it could be, say, that they think it's like a 3. So they might say, well, if I was a 3 out of 10, I can live with a 3 out of 10. 3 out of 10 means some days it might be better, some days it might be a bit worse, but generally that's a manageable level if I'm coping and staying at that kind of space. And so you then get, okay, well, what is a 3? If I asked you, where are you rating yourself, and you told me I would say I'm a 3, describe to me what a 3 is. What would you wake up? Uh, what would be different when you wake up? What would your life go like? So they then tell you what a 3-day is. You now know a whole bunch of tasks that you can set them. So if a 3-day was things like that they go out for a walk, you know that at some point, obviously not talking about our current situation, at some point, you know that during therapy, you can get to a point where you know they're likely to be close enough to being comfortable going out for a walk that if you suggest between now and next time, it'd be great if you could just go out for a walk. Um, tell me how you get on, and you talk about them, where would they go, and all the rest of it. You know, you can set that as a task at some future point, because you know that when you do and they start doing it and they're comfortable with it, they've started doing something that's their kind of 3-day. And so that's kind of how you're doing therapy. You haven't asked about the problem yet. You're focusing on the day that they have, how that day goes, and how they can move kind of forward with their life and what that moving forward looks like. So generally in therapy, clients shouldn't have to reveal much about their actual problem. They know what their problem is. They don't need to tell a therapist that, because they already know it. And all the therapist will know is kind of what that problem is, which is probably already written down in the notes of most clients. So then you want to also know, when have you had this problem? So again, you're not specifically asking for the details of the problem. You're saying, has there been a time in the past when this problem hasn't existed? What was different about that time? You want to know, without asking why. You want to know, why didn't they have the problem? So why didn't they have the problem when they were 4 years old? Why didn't they have the problem when they went on holiday? Why didn't they have the problem in it? So you ask, so when hasn't the problem happened? When has the problem happened when you thought it wouldn't? Is something else you want to know. So you're looking for exceptions. So the whole point of the therapy is you're trying to look for the patterns and change those patterns. So you want to know the exceptions. When does it happen when you thought it wouldn't? So say, for example, someone had social anxiety, but not when they were with friends. They might say, oh, I had this situation where I was with my friends and I had social anxiety. And it was weird because I wouldn't expect that. So, okay, well, what was different about that situation? What was different that made it so that you had social anxiety, even though it was your friends? So you're looking for exceptions. And hopefully all the YouTube problems clear up. But yeah, so even before focusing on doing a lot more kind of ideodynamic work, most of what I did was about stimulating within the client their own kind of the sort of neurological patterns, as it were, towards better health or better mental health or whatever. It was about how to move people forward. You are getting a bit of a lesson in therapy here. How to move people forward rather than how to keep people static. So rather than focusing on the problem and then focusing even more on the problem and then even more on the problem and never actually moving forward and resolving anything, you're getting to the root of the problem, which is actually the underlying pattern. It's not the content. The content is obviously what bothers that individual. That's what they probably think about when they think about their problem. But that content isn't the underlying pattern. And as a therapist, your job is to help to change the underlying pattern, help to change that kind of, so that if you're going down a train track and you know that all the junctions are turned in a direction that leads to you crashing into a wall, it doesn't matter how much you get told, and I'm traveling down this train and then it goes left and then it starts getting faster and then it goes right and then it gets even faster and then it goes left again and it gets even faster and then it hits a wall. You don't want to know all of that. because that's just the story. Knowing all that hasn't helped you to intervene. What you want to know is what the actual pattern underlying that is. So if the pattern is, if that first junction box was flipped the other direction, they wouldn't follow that path, then that's what you want to know. You want to know you can intervene by changing that first junction box so that they take a completely different path in the first place and they never take that old path. So even if you're doing therapy not as minimal as you're doing when you're doing ideodynamic therapy, you're still, if you're a good therapist, in my opinion, you're still focusing as much as you can on what is the pattern here, what's going on here. You're not focusing on wanting to know more about the story, as it were, not wanting to know more about the actual problem itself. You want to know what is going to make a difference, what is going to help you get better, which should be a therapist's focus. The therapist's focus should be, yep, hope lots of people clapped. Obviously, I'm sat here and couldn't, but so yeah, so you're trying to get that focus on, what will help you to get better, rather than the focus being on just focusing on the problem over and over again. So the ideodynamic healing is kind of the step up on that. So good healing, good therapy is find out what's wrong and sort of what the pattern is, what the problem is, so that you can fix that and find the ways of moving forward. The step up from that is trust that the person knows what's wrong within them, and trust that maybe they don't consciously necessarily know the details, which is largely true for most people. Even if you have a vague idea, the last thing you probably know is exactly what led to you being in the right frame of mind to develop a problem in the first place, etc. So trust that it's within them, and just give them a space and encouragement to work through that until they get to a resolution. So I told the story, I can't remember when, but in one of these live streams, about going to the murder mystery weekend as a teenager and finding who had done the murder by using a pendulum and just holding a pendulum over each photo of each person who was taking part in the murder mystery thing. So the sort of all the suspects, and saying, is it this person? Is it this person? Is it this person? Is it this person? And waiting for it to say yes or no. And once it said, yes, it's that person, I trusted that non-consciously I'd picked up on enough information that that information was turned into this ideodynamic, this idiomotor movement of the pendulum moving. And that is what you're doing in ideodynamic therapy. You're finding some unconscious response and you're using that to help to do the therapy. So you essentially are saying something along the lines of, give me a sign to say that you're starting to work on this outside of your conscious awareness. Give me a sign to say you are working on it, or sort of do something that you're working on it. A sign to say that you've finished that inner work, and then you'll come back to the room, so to speak. So it could be, for example, say you're using hand movements. It could be, the hands might move together as the work starts. They might move around while the work's going on. And then when the work's finished, the hands might lower down to the legs. So then you've not had to ask for any information or anything. All you've had to do is essentially have that kind of interaction with the client that kind of lets you know what they're doing, even though they don't consciously know what they're doing. You've got that kind of agreement that when your hands come together, that means you're starting the work. The hands will do something while you're doing the work. It could be they do nothing. They might remain stationary. And then the hands will lower down once that inner work is finished, and you'll just naturally open your eyes, come back to the room. It could be, giving a finger signal just a twitch of the finger to say you're starting the work, and then maybe no movement at all while they're doing the work, and then a twitch of the finger to say they finished the work. Um, so you're just trying to get some kind of connection that you can use, some way of communicating. So I've had some people who say it's a feeling in my stomach. That's what it is. So you can tell someone what you want them to use, but if someone has something themselves that they can use that feels right for them, then that's what you would use. You'd be very client focused, and that's the most important thing, is that you're doing what's right for that one individual in front of you. So you don't try and force them, for example, to visualize if they're not really good at visualizing. If they say, I can feel it in my stomach, that lets me know the work is beginning, okay. And when you get a signal that lets you know that work is done, just let me know. And so they carry on, and maybe they suddenly get a tingling on their body or something. They get some kind of signal that says that inner work is now complete. I still ask questions. I still ask scaling. I want to know, because you want to be able to check whether they feel like they've made progress in the session. So you want something there to do that. So you might ask, so scale of 0 to 10. 10 is things are the worst they could be. 0 is the opposite. Where are you now? I'm a 9. Okay. Where would you be happy with? 3 or 4. Okay. And do you have an idea of, so they don't have to tell you out loud, but do you have an idea of how life will be different when all these changes have happened? And so you do all that stuff. They don't have to verbalize stuff necessarily to you. And so they're not verbalizing stuff necessarily, but they have to kind of know within themselves, so that you know that they know what it is they're working on. Sometimes people do need other things. So, for example, I worked with someone who said they had a fear of loud bangs. And I said, okay, so tell me about this fear. And they said, well, I hear a loud bang and it scares me. So, okay, so give me an example. Well, if a car backfires, I jump. I said, okay, then what happens? Well, nothing. I'm fine after I've jumped. Well, that's not a fear. That's a normal reaction. That's how people react. When you hear a loud bang, you jump. That's normal. I said, I react like that. And she said, oh my God, do you have this fear as well? I said, no, it's not a fear. Jumping when you hear a loud bang and then having no problem after you've jumped because things have gone back to normal is normal. And she replied by saying, well, no, because I've watched the Queen on TV. And when all the guns go off next to the Queen, she never flinches, she never jumps. So it's obviously not normal for me to jump when I hear a loud bang. And I sort of had to explain that I think the Queen probably does jump kind of internally. You don't necessarily always literally jump out your skin, especially not when you've done it so long and so many times that you know what's coming. It doesn't like when a hammer comes down. You don't necessarily jump out your skin the third and fourth time the hammer comes down, but you do still jump a bit internally because it keeps banging. So yes, there are some people who you end up needing to offer some kind of psychoeducation around stuff to help, rather than even doing therapy. They just need stuff to be put into context, and they need to have it explored from an educational perspective. But for therapy, they don't necessarily have to tell you much information or any information. All you want to know is that they know what the problem is, that they would like what they would like their life to be like, so that they know inside themselves what it is they're actually working on. It's no good if they come in and they're thinking about their shopping list and they're thinking about lots of other stuff. You want them to be thinking about what it is they're here for, and invested in the process. So with ideodynamic working, it works on a mind-body level. You're working entirely non-consciously. So I'm going to have a swig of my coffee, my cold coffee here. So there's, let's move my cursor over. So there's you can work, for example, as I say, with automatic movements, where it could be a finger signal, or it could be hand movements, or it could be some other kind of. It could be head nods, for example, automatic head nodding. You can work with automatic sensations. So it could be a sudden tingling feeling or something like that. You can work with automatic feelings. So it could be a sudden feeling, like an emotion or something. So you work with whatever the client sort of brings to the table. I do some of this obviously on uh, in my videos and things, and but I don't obviously I can't know how it's. I might do something here with you guys watching as well, but I can't obviously respond to your responses, which is kind of the difference. So, for example, if I used hand movements, I can say, that's it. And if I see that the person maybe is looking a bit, what often happens, say it's anxiety based, or it's to do with some kind of trauma, or it's to do with depression or something like that, or even anger or something. Um, what you can often notice is that at some point while they're working on things, their face might show signs of an emotion, like their eyes might glaze over, they might look like they're about to cry or something. So you might give just supportive comments like, that's it, having the strength to go through this. You don't know what they're going through, but you're able to feedback supportive statements based on your observations. So you know, oh, they're obviously working on something now because they're starting to, yeah, their face is starting to go a bit red. Um, their eyes are starting to tear up a bit. Their pulse has speeded up. Their breathing has got shallower. So you're able to then kind of say, that's it, having the strength to carry on through this, having the strength to work through that. And so you're able to just be supportive. You're not telling them what they're working through. You're not trying to interpret anything. You're just kind of commenting on your observations. So there's the video of me on my YouTube channel with the guy who starts moving his hands all around, and his hands are constantly coming together as if he's gathering something up. And so I just threw out the comment of something like, that's it, just continuing to gather up all that and make that progress. And so I just threw the idea out there. And if he's not gathering anything up, it's a vague enough statement that it just means nothing really to him. It's just, he'll just assume that I've probably seen something that he's not consciously aware of. But if he is actually gathering stuff up, then, like, metaphorically, for whatever's going on in his mind, then I have just commented on something demonstrating that I'm aware of what he's doing, um, outside of his conscious awareness. And with that person specifically, he kind of did lots of movements, gathering stuff up, and then he ended by bringing both his hands to his chest and took a deep breath, and then his hands dropped to his sides, and then he opened his eyes with a smile. And I had told him beforehand that I knew that's exact. I told him, I know what you're going to do, and I said, I'll show you how I knew that, because I was videoing the session. I said, I'll show you how I knew that at the end of this, because he was also learning hypnotherapy and learning how to do ideodynamic therapy. And in his description, he had done all of he sort of said, I've just got all this stuff that I just need to try and figure out, but I'll know once I've done it. And so I knew that he was going to replicate what he had done while describing what he wanted to achieve. He was going to replicate that non-consciously. So there are some interesting books, obviously. I've got to move Darren Brown out my way. So I've got this theory where you help people to know what to do and how to do it. And then if people are interested, they can learn how it works later. That's kind of my logic. So when I teach hypnotherapy, within the first 15 minutes, so people will arrive, anyone who's trained with me will know this. People who arrive, they arrive 5 minutes in, I've done my hi, I'm Dan. Some of you know me, some of you don't. Here's a bit about me. Here's where the fire escapes are. No planned fire bell, fire alarms, etc., etc. All the usual stuff you have to do when you're running a course. Then you do then I do move on to, right, the first thing you're going to do is pair up and hypnotize each other. I'll do a quick demonstration and then you crack on with it. So who wants to volunteer to come up here and be hypnotized? And then no one will put their hand up. And then I'll sort of say, come on, someone's got to volunteer. Then someone will put their hand up. They'll come up. Everyone will clap, thinking I'm glad someone else volunteered. They come up, they sit next to me. I then say, okay, what all of you are going to do is just say what you see. So you're going to turn to the person, you're going to have the goal of helping them to be relaxed and kind of inner focused and just sort of in that relaxed, focused state. And you're just going to say what you see, and everything you see is correct in terms of them becoming inner focused. So all you have to do is link everything that you see with the idea that they're focusing internally and they're becoming relaxed. And I said, it's literally as easy as that. And then I will spend a couple of minutes talking to the person, sort of, I'll see them blink. So I'll say, that's it, because they've just blinked, which is an internal focused thing. I'll see them do an out breath. That's it. And each out breath you take can help you to just drift even deeper into hypnosis. And then I'll see them maybe slump their shoulders because of what I've just said. That's it. And as you slump your shoulders, you can just go even deeper still. And so all I'm doing is connecting whatever they do to being the correct thing to be doing for them to be going into hypnosis. And I'll do that for a couple of minutes. 15 minutes in, everyone's in pairs. Everyone does this, 5 minutes one way, and then 5 minutes the other person does it. And then everyone comes back to the room. So within the first 30 minutes of being on a training course, everyone has hypnotized everyone else. And they've done that with no training on language patterns, no training on anything hypnotic more than that. And the rest of it is then obviously, okay, now I'll tell you what it is you were doing, how you were doing it. You can now learn more intricacies. You can now learn about language patterns that can help you to then do even better at this. You can learn some of what you were doing instinctively, because I explain how you're doing all the language patterns without knowing what they are. You're doing them because they're part of hypnotizing people in this way. And so after I've done all that, people then think, wow, that was so easy. I'm comfortable doing hypnosis. I've no problem with that, because as long as the person's willing to engage with me and sit opposite me, then obviously I can hypnotize them. And that's kind of how I think here as well, that I've just told you that essentially for ideodynamic healing, all you want is to be able to know, give me a sign to say that you've started, give me a sign to say you've finished, and do something in the middle, and then I'll just reinforce that and keep you on track. So a bit like Milton Erickson talked about when he was a lad around farms and in a country community area. He was walking along and he found a horse, and he said to his friends, oh, I'll take it back to where it came from. And his friend said, oh, do you know which field it came from? He said, no, but I'm sure the horse does. And so he got on the horse's back, he nudged it in the sides, the horse started kind of walking along. Every now and then the horse would go over to the side of the road and put its head down and try and eat some grass. He would just nudge the horse in the side and lift its head up out of the grass and keep the horse going. And eventually the horse turned into its field that it came from. And so that's all you're doing in therapy, that you're just keeping the client's head out the grass, essentially, keeping them on track while they find their way to their destination. And then once they get to their destination, you know it, because they suddenly come out and say, I'm here now, I've done it, all the work's done. So there are a number of books. I've got a lot of them by Ernest Rossi. So I definitely recommend checking out his website. He has lots of free stuff on his website that you can check out. Lots of free stuff like, articles he's written, scientific articles and things he's written for journals and things. So you've got things like dreams, consciousness, dreams, consciousness, spirit, the quantum experience of self-reflection and co-creation. So the thing about a lot of Ernest Rossi's books, some of them are hard to read, some of them are easier to read. That one's quite an easy to read one. This one is a very easy to read one as well. The Symptom Path to Enlightenment. And there he's got his wife doing a hand movement, idiodynamic hand movement thing. One of you had talked about it earlier, The 20-Minute Break, which is a very good book. So a lot of it is about understanding rhythms and things. So I think I've spoken before, maybe on here, about, you know, when you're hypnotizing someone or doing a hypnotherapy session, ideally you want it to be 90 minutes to 2 hours long. And you know then that at some point during that 90 minutes to 2 hours, the client will naturally go into hypnosis. They'll naturally drift inside their mind and have an ultradian dip. So the sort of the inner focused part of your basic rest and activity cycle. And that's the point where people drift in and they daydream, they drift in, and it's a bit like a computer auto-saving. So that 20-minute dip is where you're essentially saying to yourself, right, auto-save what you've been getting up to for the last 90 minutes, because or else we'll forget it. And so if you, for example, drink coffee on that 20-minute dip and you force yourself not to have it, and you keep forcing yourself not to have it, suddenly you start finding yourself forgetful, you start finding yourself sort of having more memory issues and challenges because you keep overriding your natural biological way of responding. So we're human and we can cope quite well with a few of these being overridden, because obviously for survival, you need to be able to, you know, if you're about to approach a 20-minute dip and a giant tiger jumps out on you, it's better to run away from that tiger than to say, hang on a minute, just going to go and meditate. You know, it's better to be safe than dead. So you can override some of these for a period of time without it having too much negative impact. But if you do it too often, then you start having a lot of challenges with like memory, and you can feel very drained and exhausted because you're not giving yourself that chance to recover your energy by having that 20-minute period of relaxation every 90 to 120 minutes or so. So all these things, you know, are kind of important to know about. And something in the 20-Minute Break book is almost setting up like, here's a day, here's how you can live a day that's in line with your biological rhythms, how you naturally kind of respond in the world. I've got some non-Rossi books, but I'll possibly get onto them later. The Psychobiology of Gene Expression is another good book. Most of these, as you'll see, are reasonably chunky. This one, something I quite like, is on page 60, I think it is. I like the smell of it. On page 60, which is quite interesting, is a table that has many of your rhythms and the timescales of those rhythms, if you can see that. So that has things like your neural transmission rhythms, respiration cycle, immediate early gene activation, human panic attack cycle, typical periods for napping, self-hypnosis, epiphany experiences, brain entrainment, meditation periods, your bacterial cell cycle, etc. So that's quite interesting. But the idea is, it is interesting. What do I do 20 hours a day? Yeah, you can't work at 100% 20 hours a day. The countries where people work shorter hours and fewer days are the countries where people are more productive, get far more work done, and have much better mental and physical health, and are better able to kind of cope with, better able to cope with stress and things like that. Countries where you end up working 50, 60 hours a week um, don't really do so well. And there's the story always told about people who work stupid hours for their entire life so that they've got loads of money and everything for their retirement, and then they retire and die because of the fact they've been too stressed for all their life, so they couldn't end up enjoying what they had set out to hopefully enjoy. um, but yeah, so the idea is, now there's a video, I will get it down from my shelf. I'm sure that book is going to fall. Nope, it hasn't. There's a video or a DVD that I really like by Ernest Rossi. It's "We Light and Brighten the Lamps of Human Consciousness, Facilitating the Evolution of Human Consciousness." It's a video with Ernest Rossi and his wife sharing about their outcomes of their research on using DNA microarrays. So they're looking at how genes are expressed over time when you have therapy. And so people had a period of hypnosis, focusing on a topic, so it was a period of like ideodynamic therapy, focusing on a topic. And then they'd had their DNA checked beforehand. They then had their DNA checked immediately afterwards, and then they had their DNA checked at intervals of time over the next bunch of months until the changes had stopped. So until that sort of cascade of epigenetic changes had taken place. And what was found was that your early immediate genes kick in with epigenetic changes for well-being and what have you straight away. So as soon as you've had the hypnotherapy session, then or any other session, but in this case it was a ideodynamic hypnotherapy session, and then that has a cascade of epigenetic changes that carries on for about 3 to 4 months, which is the time it takes on average for a period of therapy to take place for someone to move on from their problem. So if you have what could be termed brief therapy, normally the changes happen over about a 3 to 4 month period for you to get to the end of the changes that you want to do. And that's what this showed. So what ends up happening is that you do some work. There are things that trigger positive epigenetic changes. Things like loving touch triggers positive epigenetic changes. And in fact, because the brain can't tell the difference between something that's real and something that's vividly imagined, you can actually trigger some of these changes by using your imagination. So for example, when I did the love story, which is the one that went live on Wednesday, someone had said in the chat they really needed a hug. And so obviously in that story, it ends with someone getting a loving hug, a sort of loving embrace as sort of towards the end of the story, because that's what they said they needed. And so if they had followed along to that and were vividly imagining the story playing out, then when they get to that, as that character, they can have a sense of having that loving hug. And even if you watch someone having a loving hug, your brain kind of responds as if it could be happening to you as well. So because of your mirror neurons. So I'm curious about what's going on in the live chat. But yeah, so I will just comment on some of this. Yeah, smokers generally are more likely to end up getting their ultradian breaks in because they're normally going out, having breaks maybe every hour and a half or so. When people carry out an addictive behavior, normally it is on the ultradian dip. It is when you get to that period of time where you then dip down for 20 minutes or so. That's when you suddenly feel this urge to stand up, go and do something, go and take a break, go and have a cigarette, go and have a coffee, whatever. That's when you feel like making a change and doing something. Um, and a smoker will go out, and obviously when I work with smokers, one thing I always point out is that smokers breathe correctly far more than non-smokers do, because a smoker will, and it's the breathing that relaxes them. So when smokers tell me they smoke because it relaxes them, nicotine is a stimulant, so it doesn't actually relax you. And smokers will say, well, I smoke and it relaxes me, so of course it relaxes you. It's the breathing you do that relaxes you. If you go you're doing a longer out breath than in breath, and so clearly you're triggering the relaxation response. And so when you're in that 20-minute period where you're kind of absent-mindedly in a kind of trancy state, carrying out an automatic behavior, kind of drifting almost in a daydream, and you're doing deep relaxing breathing, and then after say 5, 10, 15 minutes, I don't know many smokers who are back in 5 minutes, um, you're actually kind of better for your mental health than the member of staff who doesn't smoke, who never leaves their desk for their whole shift. When I worked at Butlins, I used to say I am taking every hour and a half, I'm taking an orange squash break, because I was getting really annoyed that across a 15-hour shift, I'd be doing all this extra work that my colleagues weren't doing because I wouldn't be taking any extra breaks. I'd have my normal breaks and that would be it. And I was told, well, you don't have an addiction, so you're not allowed to take all those extra breaks. If you've got an addiction, you can. So I said, I've just developed an addiction to orange squash, and I'm going to keep drinking it every 90 minutes or so. So that's what I did. I made sure I went out for an orange squash break every 90 minutes, to kind of get the same benefit as my colleagues who smoked. Just having a look, see if there's anything else there. Yeah, I've always obviously uh, taken breaks. Yeah, exactly. It's obviously illegal not to let someone take breaks. Um, yeah, certain epigenetic changes can get passed on to future generations. So I've been talking on my YouTube channel about epigenetics since about 2000 and, well, since I started on YouTube, since 2007. And my most unpopular videos are the ones where I've talked about epigenetics. So I did a video years ago, about maybe 2009, talking about the research into how epigenetic changes caused from people eating a lot of fast food, sort of junk food stuff, um, get passed on to future generations and can create health problems in the future generations. And I talked about how this is different for men and women. So, because women are born with all the eggs that they're ever going to have at the point of them being born, the change skips a generation. Uh, Whereas for men, the change is in the next generation because they create sperm continuously. And so I made this sort of video about this, and I had in my description all of the kind of links to the research papers about it and everything. And it was overwhelmingly hated by people, with a vast number of negative attacking comments saying about how I'm scaremongering, how this is all lies, how genes don't change, you can't change genes. Um, Even though I'm pointing out it's not about changing the gene, it's not like mutated genes. We're talking about the way genes are expressed and what's turned on and what's turned off. About sort of methylation. And so I'd sort of explained all this in the video, but yeah, so that was a really unpopular video. My video where I talked about touch, the healing power of touch, was really unpopular, saying that it's promoting people believing in healing, which is complete rubbish. And I'm again pointing out that um, touch triggers stress protecting epigenetic changes as soon as that touch happens, assuming that it's interpreted as a loving touch. And in fact, there's a story, I think it's in this book here, a true story. And if it's in here and I can find it very quickly, I will read it. I'm pretty sure that it's in here, in this specific book. Yes. So I will briefly read you. So sit back and relax, people. This is a very short little story. I'm not reading you like something long, but it's just a summary mentioned in here. A Sister's Helping Hand, How Touch Can Turn On Gene Expression. The heartwarming true story of A Sister's Helping Hand that appeared in the Reader's Digest of May 1995 provides a vivid example of gene expression via human experience. The story begins with the premature birth of twins. Each of the twins was immediately placed in a separate incubator in accordance with the normal hospital rules. One of the twins, the weaker of the two, was not expected to live, however. A sympathetic nurse, following her heartfelt intuition and sense of sheer desperation, defied hospital rules by placing the two babies together in one incubator. Unexpectedly, the healthier twin threw an arm over her sister in an endearing embrace. The smaller baby's heart soon stabilized. Her temperature returned to normal, and she survived. The twins thrived together, and now, at home, they still sleep snuggling together. How can we account for what appeared to be a heart-warming miracle wrought by a newborn sister's helping hand? No one was around at the time to measure gene expression in the twins during their early life crisis. Current research in gene expression and human experience, however, is now finding an answer to how healing by touch is possible. Saul Schaunsberg and his colleagues at Duke University, for example, discovered how maternal touch can activate immediate early genes such as CMYC and MAX, which in turn activate a target gene called ODC. There is actually the names of some of these. I'm not reading them. Never been good at chemical names, like ornithine dicarbonase or whatever it is. See, that's why I'm not reading them. Turning on the ODC gene leads to the synthesis of proteins that contribute to physical growth and maturation at a cellular level. And then there's some figures, like illustrations, which it says illustrate experimental findings that deprivation of maternal touch for 10 or 15 minutes results in a dramatic drop in ODC gene expression and the physical growth of 10-day-old rat pups. Within 2 hours, ODC activity is down 40%, where it remains until maternal touch returns. Figure 1.1b's graph, the full recovery of heart rate and overcompensation, shows the full recovery of heart rate and overcompensation to 300% of normal ODC gene expression in the brain after the touch-deprived pups were returned to their mother. A graduate student stroking of the pups lightly with a soft, tufted artist's paintbrush for 15 minutes was enough to turn on the ODC gene and other genes and hormones associated with biological growth as well. It's been known for some time that human infant orphans fail to thrive and grow physically when isolated in an institution without the normal amount of touch, even when all other needs for warmth, food, and care are provided. And anyone who studied psychology and stuff will probably have seen the videos of what would be very immoral things to do nowadays with children. The condition has been called psychosocial dwarfism or non-organic failure to thrive. When pediatric nurses supplied infants suffering from this deprivation with tender, loving touch, however, their growth patterns returned to normal within hours. The non-organic failure to thrive diagnosis was also documented by social workers investigating homes where the environment was described as psychosocially inadequate. It was found that failure to thrive babies in these homes had abnormally low growth hormone levels, which are associated with low ODC gene expression activity. Once the babies received adequate maternal touch, however, ODC gene expression, growth hormone, and physical growth returned to normal. Simple administration of growth hormone alone, without continued maternal touch, failed to improve the growth of these failure to thrive babies. Obviously, it carries on with the chapter, but it's kind of just showing that it's nice when he reads. Yeah, so it's kind of showing that how genes can be turned on, how you can use touch, for example. So there's a lot of therapies that are thought of as kind of complete rubbish, and people dismiss them because they just think of them as complete rubbish in terms of therapy. And yet there are certain things that could actually be leading to certain healing within those therapies. So, for example, the therapies where you're laying on hands could be doing a similar thing, could be triggering that gene expression for well-being, for growth, for personal kind of growth, etc. So obviously that's in the Psychobiology of Gene Expression. That was what I was just reading from. And so the idea of gene expression is that, or epigenetics, is that it's not about saying that genes mutate. It's not a change to the genes themselves, as in like, a mutation. It's whether a gene is expressed, whether a gene is turned on or off, and then a combination of genes can be turned on or off. Some genes are early activation genes. They'll be turned on straight away as soon as something happens. So there are things that turn on early activation genes. There's novelty. If something's novel, if something's wondrous, if something evokes a sense of wonder, if something is I don't know, something is surprising in some way, that kind of thing will turn on that early gene expression. There are things like touch that will turn on the gene expression. Things can turn on, obviously, positive or negative gene expression. So some things can trigger more of a stress response. Some can trigger a more healing response. In this book, there's, for example, talk about certain doctors who have talked about what the genes are that, if they're expressed, end up making it so that the body's T cells fight cancer, and people go into natural remission from cancer. So that's quite an interesting book. I'm trying to see. Oh no, I don't have a first edition of that, I don't think. But that one's an interesting book. There's all of Rossi's books kind of build on. Let me get a bunch of them down. They're all heavy because they're, obviously, you saw them all on the thumbnail. They build on his research as years have gone on. So this is I think one of his earliest ones of these books that I'm holding here. A Discourse with Our Genes, the Psychosocial and Cultural Genomics of Therapeutic Hypnosis and Psychotherapy. So a nice, easy to read title. Yeah, so the genes don't change, but they have the methylation happening, and so they're expressed differently. And it's trying to make sure that people understand that it isn't about genes changing. It's not about like a mutation, because mutations are generally not a good thing to happen. there's no guarantee a mutation is going to have a negative impact, but generally you don't want mutations to be happening. A whole bunch of them could be bad. The Psychobiology of Mind-Body Healing is another one that's not too bad to read. I do have an earlier version of this, a signed copy, up on my shelf. So it's kind of trying to help people to realize that a lot of these changes happen. It's the way that genes are expressed, but it happens through your mind and through your brain and through your body. It triggers the sending of chemical messengers through the body, like dopamine or whatever it happens to be, to trigger the body to respond in certain ways. So they can be turned on or off. So it triggers the chemical messengers that end up triggering the body to respond in certain ways to that message. And there's a cascade of different epigenetic changes that happen. It's not like you've triggered early immediate genes or something, and then those genes, that's the end of the story. That moves on to others, triggering others, until all the work, is this my back to front book? Yeah. So until you get the outcome you want. And so that's my preferred way of doing therapy, that if I do therapy with someone now, which doesn't work quite so well via Skype or something, but if I do therapy now, my preferred way is to be thinking, right, I just want to trigger that deep part of you, so the sort of non-conscious part of you, which is unconscious processes and everything which you are not conscious. I want to trigger that healing from within you, and that will go right down to an epigenetic level. It's not just changing your thinking, or it's not just changing your behaviors, or it's not just changing how you feel about something or reframing something. It's literally changing you as a being almost. The breakout heuristic, one of you, I can't remember which one, was it Holly? I can't remember, said that you were reading that or had got it or something. So that's a good book. Again, the subheading, A New Neuroscience of Mirror Neurons, Consciousness and Creativity in Human Relationships, makes it a bit harder it's not the most catchy title. And his most recent one, other than the one that, nope, must have been Fox then. Someone here said they'd read it, or were reading it, or bought it, and I flashed off the other one. That's who it was. I was going to say, I knew someone here who regularly comments had said it. Creating Consciousness, How Therapists Can Facilitate Wonder, Wisdom, Truth, and Beauty. So that's, I think, Ernest Rossi's most recent one of his own, like just him doing the book. They're all papers, collections of his papers over the years. So each one kind of builds on the research of the previous books. So in Psychobiology of Gene Expression, for example, Ernest Rossi asks questions in it saying, here's what scientists need to be looking at next. Here's what scientists need to be kind of working on. Here's the questions that we need to be exploring for research. And then obviously as time goes on, more research gets done, and his next book will say, here's where things stand now. And then his next book will be very similar, but then it'll be, here's an updated load. Here's where everything stands now for this period of time, all the way up to Creating Consciousness. There's an ebook version that's incredibly simplified, that's available on Amazon Kindle. Incredibly simplified, very quick and easy read, in my opinion. Probably the best book if you want to get into his stuff. I think it's called something very similar to Creating Consciousness. I think he also offers it for free as a PDF download on his website, ernestrossi.com. But I don't know if the PDF has all of the links in it. But the ebook version from Amazon has the links in it that open up like videos about certain parts. So if you want to know more about the topic, it opens up like a YouTube video or whatever on that bit of the topic, or showing you, for example, maybe a video of a process taking place, a non sort of, an epigenetic process like methylation or something taking place. So that's a good book if you can read it. And when I was in hospital after being ran over, this book arrived the day that I got ran over. Mind Body Therapy, Methods of Idiodynamic Healing in Hypnosis. That arrived the day that I was hit by a truck and hospitalized. So what I did in hospital was I sat there, and as best as I could, given that I had one arm strapped up like, nope, that arm was actually flat. Nope, I'm trying to work out. Nope, that's my broken arm. That arm was strapped up like that. This arm had a drip in it with morphine going into my wrist, into my the back of my hand. So I was stuck in a chair like that, and so I tried to read as best as I could. But I was reading that book while I was in hospital, and then trying to put the ideas into practice to heal myself while I was in hospital. So it was a very fortuitous thing having that arrive at the time that I needed it. Obviously, I'd ordered it like a week or something beforehand, but it was good that it turned up at that time. And it was good that I was in hospital and able to have time to read it. But a recent one, Ernest Rossi has done with Richard Hill. So I've interviewed Richard Hill on my channel before, or we didn't interview but we had like two therapists discussing the topic because we're both fascinated by the topic. I interviewed Ernest Rossi in 2009 or something. I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong. I can't remember when it was. Maybe 2010. I don't know. There are lots of therapists like me, especially in the US. The difficulty is that clients don't know therapists. Clients don't know different forms of therapy, and you might only be able to be offered certain things in your area. And the doctors aren't psychiatrists, so they're not going to know necessarily what would be the best way forward. But yeah, so I'd interviewed Ernest Rossi many years ago, never heard of Richard Hill at the time, and then a therapist friend of mine told me about Richard Hill and said that Richard was wanting to come and teach in the UK. I was running hypnotherapy courses up in London at the time, and so this friend of mine who was organising the therapy courses on my behalf, that was the only way to get me to run them in London, said, how about instead of me running one, we have Richard Hill come and run the mirroring hands course that he runs, which is an idiodynamic approach that is kind of developed by Ernest Rossi. Maybe Richard could come and run something there. So we started organising that, and then we handed it over. I say we, it wasn't me, because I hate organising these sort of things. So it was actually my friend. He was doing all the organising and everything. And it became something that was a bit bigger task than he'd hoped. So he handed over the organisation to a hypnotherapy company. We helped to get students to it, obviously. And obviously I went and trained with Richard and met Richard at it, and then interviewed Richard for my channel because I just wanted to have us talking about this topic. It's a topic that I used to always talk about on my channel, among other things, and hadn't really, because my sleep stories were taking off and I was focusing more on autism and trying to move away from the hypnotherapy world. So this is something that I wasn't talking about much because I saw it as being too linked to hypnotherapy. Whereas talking about it almost independently obviously feels a bit better, but I don't know. But anyway, so The Practitioner's Guide to Mirroring Hands, a client responsive therapy that facilitates natural problem solving and mind-body healing. That's, again, it's a very good, very easy to read book. And Richard, obviously, did he sign this copy? Did I not get him to sign my copy? Doesn't look like I got Richard to sign my copy. I'll have to do that one day. All that meeting him, I had him sign a copy of his own book, his other book, but not that one. So that's an easy to read book. Yeah, but you don't study something. It's not walking away. There's a difference between what I do privately and what I do publicly. I study things because I want to learn the subject. I don't study things because of anything else. So I don't study, for example, I don't study therapy to be a therapist. I study therapy because I'm fascinated by the topic. And obviously, I need an income. So I'll then obviously have done therapy because I need an income. So it's kind of separating out the difference between the topic, my actions, and kind of what I'm doing above those actions. So my reason for sharing, I learn these things, and then I want to share those knowledge with people, so others hopefully go and learn this stuff. As you've mentioned, you struggle to find a therapist who does this sort of thing or who works in these kind of ways. My channel used to be largely full of mind body healing stuff, but nobody watches it. Literally, September, I stopped posting it because nobody ever watched it. I've posted demonstrations. I've posted lectures teaching different stuff, similar to what I'm teaching now, but instead of it being me talking at a camera live, it's edited so that you don't have me waffle and being interrupted and answering other questions and taking tangents and things. So obviously me sharing it was more a case of, why isn't everyone doing this as therapy? Why aren't all therapists seeming to follow the science? Why are so many people dogmatic around, this is the way we've done it for 100 years, so that's the way it should be done, rather than thinking scientifically, which is, right, this is the best knowledge we have at this time, so this is how we do it. And then 10 years later, oh, we've now learned how to tweak what we do, and we've learned what bits were ineffective and how to build on that, and so now we do this. And then 10 years later, oh, we've now changed how we do that. People don't change with the times. Courses don't change with the times. You attend courses nowadays, and a lot of the content on the courses is either content which supports itself rather than content which says, here are the opposing views on what it is we're teaching you, or it's content which has been the same methods for years and years and years. For example, back in 2004, I started training with the Tavistock Institute in London. It was distance learning, but also they came down to where I was working and would teach us in the workplace. So you'd have kind of weekly lessons over a handful of days each week. And it was when I was helping to set up a therapeutic children's home. So the idea was, as part of setting up the therapeutic children's home, before we had children in the home, we were undergoing training around psychodynamic therapy. And that was the approach that the directors felt that they wanted us to learn to do the therapy for the children. And having already been trained as a therapist, and I was still going under more training as a therapist privately outside of work because of being fascinated by therapy, I had questions that I wanted answers for. For example, the psychiatrist person came down from London, and was talking about how things like projective identification works, and transference and countertransference and these sort of things. And when I asked about how, what they're telling me, they were saying that the client will be projecting psychically through the ether and into the therapist. And likewise, the therapist will be projecting psychically through the ether into the client. So obviously my first question was, what evidence do you have that there is such a thing as an ether? And they said, well, no one has found what it is exactly yet, but obviously it exists. And yet it's been debunked so many times over the last 1.5 centuries, even longer than that, actually, since the early 1800s. It's been debunked so many times that there is no ether. There is no magical fluid that permeates reality that we can transfer thoughts through into other beings. And so I kept questioning, saying, well, if you're teaching this, and this was an MA, I said, if you're teaching this, I want to know what the ether is, how you know that the ether exists. And then on top of knowing how the ether exists, I want to know by what mechanism thoughts travel from one being to another through this ether. Like, what actual measurements have we got? What sort of, how do we know this other than you telling me this? And they said, we just know it. We haven't found the evidence yet, but we just know it. We know this is how it works. And I said, well, can't I make a counter claim of what might be happening, that it's actually rapport? And the lecturer said, I don't know what rapport is. So I then explained what rapport was, and they said, no, it's definitely not that. I said, but to me, it makes more logical sense that when I, as say a client, am feeling really angry or anxious, the therapist's mirror neurons fire because the therapist naturally is closely focused on this client in front of them and is naturally then falling into the same kind of rhythms as the client in front of them. So their mirror neurons fire, making them feel a little bit of what the client feels. And that when they then feel a little bit of what the client feels, because they're so closely attuned to the client, and they're now feeling a little bit of what the client feels, they're starting to think, oh, I'm feeling a bit anxious or whatever, because that's what the client feels. To me, that makes more logical sense. And there is research to back that up than a magic ether fluid that permeates reality that people are sending thoughts through that has no evidence. That's kind of how every session that I attended went for the year or so that I was doing this, multiple times a week. So I obviously got on really, really well doing this course. And I was told I have to keep my therapeutic views to myself in terms of my work, that's not the approach they want us to take in terms of helping the kids to improve. And that I need to keep all those things just only to me, which totally kind of baffled me. So, for example, we were told that, so this would be working with children who were, say, 5, 6 to 11, something like that, years old. If they've been abused, as many of them had been, we were told they had to sit in a circle with other kids of their age who've also been through numerous bad experiences, some abused, some other things. And they have to be able to openly say what happened to them and describe what happened to them in front of everyone and face up to it. And they have to face up to it over and over again, day after day, 4 p.m. every day. We had a circle where they were expected to sit down and talk about the most traumatic things that have happened to them until they can face it square on and come to terms with it. And as anyone would probably have guessed, it's not the best way to have kids improve, having them talk about how trauma, having to talk about really traumatic things in front of everyone around them, in front of staff and fellow kids in the home. And I was really uncomfortable with being expected to have to do this. And I was criticized. I've used this story before, I think on one of these videos recently. I was criticized when I helped someone feel happy and comfortable within the home because they weren't going in a bathroom, they weren't showering, they weren't washing, and so they were getting bullied for obviously poor hygiene. And I managed to get them to go swimming, which meant that a couple of times a week they showered in the swimming pool, because a swimming pool shower is nothing like a bathroom. And it was the associations with a bathroom that were making it so they couldn't shower and couldn't have a bath or anything because they'd obviously been sexually abused in a bathroom, and so were absolutely terrified about shutting themselves in a bathroom and using a bath or a shower. But they didn't have those associations with a swimming pool shower area. So I had them go swimming, and I was criticized for not having them for stopping them facing up to the trauma they've experienced. They need to live through it over and over again until they're comfortable with it and until they understand why it happened to them. And I totally disagreed with their therapeutic way of working. So I can't even remember why I went on that little rant, but so yeah, so for me, my issue. Oh yeah, it's because you're asking about me dropping out of doing therapy. For me, the sharing stuff knowledge online was to try and make more people aware, because I saw this free medium that I could do it through. Try and make people aware that there is this therapeutic stuff that isn't on therapy courses, because therapy courses are normally rigid and they've not changed for years. And the people who, so even newer courses, the practitioners that trained and then are now teaching new courses are teaching what they were taught, essentially, rather than looking at the research and seeing, well, what does the world of psychiatry, psychology, social science, what does the world of all that look like now? Because that's what you should be basing it on. And instead they'd be looking back on, well, this is what I learned and how I learned it, so it must be true. And so I saw it as, even if it meant I was getting attacked, which I did a lot, I was sharing something that hopefully, for very little effort on my part, I'd stand in front of a camera, I'd record a video for, say, 15 minutes about a topic and upload it to YouTube. And it was as easy as that. I've then shared a bit of information. I'd put a few links to research. I didn't initially, but once I started getting a lot of hate saying, because my logic was I shouldn't have to put research links and things in my description. People should go and do the research themselves. If I hear something that I think, oh, that sounds interesting, I Google it. I don't criticize the person. If I find that they're wrong, then that's fine. I found they're wrong. But to me, it's laziness if people are just always expecting me to have gone and done all the work. But I did. I started putting links in all my videos saying, okay, down below is where you'll find links to what I'm talking about here. So I did that, and same on my blog. I did it all on my blog as well, where I put links to everything. And yeah, it was just an easy way of sharing information so that hopefully more people would go and learn it and then be better therapists. But it wasn't kind of done for any other. I was equally as happy to not share that information. So when the constantly being attacked by therapists and therapy trainers for the fact that people were saying, why would anyone come and train with me if you're giving all this information away for free? And then I'd get lots of abuse, and then their students would come and give me abuse and what have you. And that was what stopped me from being on YouTube and deleting 600 odd of my videos. As I've obviously talked about all that before, but yeah, it was kind of, I was equally as comfortable leaving YouTube and thinking, well, it's no skin off my nose. I know what I know, and I'm happy to learn what I want to learn. I do all that side of it for me. I don't do it for anyone else at all. I do it, I don't. Every book behind me that I've read, which is pretty much every book behind me, I've read, and above me and below me, has been because I chose to. None of it has been, I've got to read this because that training course says I've got to. I've got to read that because I've got to do it for this purpose. It's all, I want to read that, so I'm reading it. None of it's done for anyone else. None of it's done for, obviously, I want to be the best I can be. So I want to be the best therapist I can be. So, because then it means I'm the best at my subject that I can be. But I don't do it for anyone else. I don't do it because I want to go out there and be a therapist, even if I want to be the best therapist. I know that if I don't do therapy, clearly I can't practice therapy to keep improving. Um, but yeah, so it's kind of just separating those two out. Talking of swimming pools of LSD, I just had to check I'd read that right. I've got an interesting book here. Maybe, given that I'm streaming literally every day, I'm sure I'll get round to all sorts of rubbish that's behind me at some point. I do have books like that by Theodore Barber. Will it go into focus? Signed as well, which is quite good. It's a weird feeling book, but then, you know, it's got LSD and marijuana on it, so feeling weird is fine. Just trying to scroll down. Yeah, so my experiences with the healthcare system in terms of like mental health for young people and what have you hasn't been great, really. But anyway, let's scroll down. Yeah, so obviously I still have all of my courses I've made. I still have all of I'm still planning on writing all the books I want to write, even if they're taking me longer than I want. Yeah, the ether is what the Victorian psychics, mediums, etc. used to say they did all of their stuff with ectoplasm and all that rubbish, as some still do, oddly. It was all debunked ages ago, and you would think that it was all left in the 1800s, and yet in 2004, it was still what I was being taught from the Tavistock Centre or Tavistock Institute up in London during an MA in psychosocial care. And yeah, my suspicion would be that a lot of the children receiving that kind of support, if you can call it that, are likely to end up having to have support to recover from being in children's homes because of obviously what had happened. Yeah, something that's interesting. You say, obviously, this is, I'll try and scroll a bit quicker in a minute. Ellen's comment, most people don't even want to talk publicly about positive sexual experiences, much less traumatic ones. When you attend, I've attended so many now that you know what's coming, but when you attend child protection training and safeguarding training, it's obviously very long. These courses are like 7 days long of, you know, back-to-back days of learning all about child protection and safeguarding and what have you. One of the first things that happens is on day one, they say, the instructor will say to you, okay, so what I'd like you to do is get into pairs, and I want you just to tell the person opposite you about your most recent sexual experience, and then you'll be sharing that with the group afterwards. And they'll say it to put you on the spot, to make you think, oh my God, there is no way I want to be involved in this. And then they point out, you were just asked to say something positive, something like your most recent positive sexual experience. You were just asked to say that, and you were feeling nervous and uncomfortable about the thought of having to say that to a group of people who are social worker level people here, you know, trainee social workers and what have you. A group of professionals, you were nervous to say that. Imagine when a child is telling you about that traumatic sexual experience from their childhood, etc., where maybe they've just disclosed it out the blue, so not sort of asked for. It's come out in, you've met with them and they say it. You've got to respect the fact they've chosen to tell you that, and you've got to respect how difficult, incredibly difficult it is for someone to come out and say something like that and talk about things like that. and how difficult it would be if you were trying to push them to say it and treating and talking about it with others around them. So at meetings and things where they're sat in the room and you're just nattering about it to other professionals as if it's the most normal thing, and yet they're there in the same room. Imagine if they're doing that about a sexual experience of yours, kind of thing. You get that sort of thrust in your face straight away, which I think is good. But when you've been through loads of, because you keep obviously redoing and refreshing your child protection training and safeguarding training every sort of year or whatever. So by the time you get to like the third time, you're not going to have to talk about anything. So it stops having that emotional impact on you. But you can see people who are new, who this is their first time at a course like this, are horrified that they might be about to have to talk about something like that. Yeah, I'd agree. You do want a psychology professor who says, don't take anything as fact. Do your own. Go and do the research. Go and look at what the claims are and why those claims. So it's not saying don't trust what people tell you, obviously, but it's saying look at the research and what the evidence is, and whether that evidence is a strong enough caliber to stack up to warrant the claim that was made. Um, so if someone says, "Did you know if you get bitten by a spider, you turn into a superhero?" Well, what evidence do you have for that? And if someone says, "Well, someone told me," well, that's not particularly convincing evidence. Well, I saw it. I saw someone swinging once from a lamppost, so I saw that they were bitten by a spider. Then they were swinging from a lamppost, so I know superheroes happen from being bitten by spiders. Again, not particularly compelling evidence that you're going to believe. So you want to look at, is this evidence compelling? How many, is there evidence from multiple sources? Has it been peer reviewed? Has it? What was the sample? Like, how many people were involved in this bit of evidence gathering? If it's like therapy or something. Just reading. Yeah, and you definitely should from idols. It kind of irritates me that, for example, I have two Facebook groups. I probably won't remember the names of them, but I'm about to try and say them. My Dan Jones Sleep Stories Guided Sleep Meditations group. Hopefully that was right. And my Dan Jones Hypnotherapy Studies group. The Dan Jones Hypnotherapy Studies group, someone asked the question about the unconscious mind. And I replied about how there's no such thing as an unconscious mind. There's stuff that you're consciously aware of, and there's stuff you're not consciously aware of, but there's no conscious mind and there's no unconscious mind. There's no subconscious mind. There's unconscious processes like cell division, your heart beating, things like that. There's processes that are unconscious but can be kind of conscious as well, like your breathing. It happens automatically, but you can control it as well, reasonably straightforwardly. Some people can control other things. Some people can control blood flow. That's something you're not necessarily supposed to be able to consciously control. But some people can make themselves, just by choice, blush on half their face because they've been asked to. Some people can make one pupil kind of get large and one get small just because they've been asked to. But again, something that you're not supposed to consciously necessarily be able to do. And then there are things that you're just not conscious of at this moment in time. So there's a lot of memories people have, like, what you did on your 5th birthday. You're not consciously aware of that until maybe someone shows you a photo or talks about it. If it was a memorable birthday, that suddenly makes you think, oh yeah, I remember my 5th birthday. So there's stuff that's non-conscious. It's just you are not currently consciously aware of it. And so I gave this kind of answer, explaining this, and then had people attacking me saying that goes against everything that I should stand for being an Ericksonian hypnotherapist, because Milton Erickson taught that there's an unconscious mind and a conscious mind. And so anyone who goes against that isn't being true to Ericksonian hypnotherapy and shouldn't call themselves an Ericksonian hypnotherapist. And so to me, it was like, just because Milton Erickson used to say that there was a conscious and unconscious mind doesn't mean he was right. And there's Erickson has papers in these books here, papers talking about his attempts at curing people of being gay. That doesn't mean he was right. I think his conclusion was that he consistently failed and couldn't, and so concluded that it's not something you can do. But he was of an era when, in like the 30s and 40s, he's there attempting to cure people of something that nowadays no one would try and cure someone of, or no right-minded person. There are people that do still try and do conversions and stuff, but no right-minded person would try and cure someone nowadays. And so my view is, even people who I look up to, like Milton Erickson, they're not sort of flawless, and not everything they say is correct. People do make mistakes, and people do have theories that were wrong and what have you. Which title do you need to see again to write down? I didn't see which one that you didn't see. Practitioner's Guide to Mirroring Hands, I've shown. Mind-body therapy, I've shown. Creating Consciousness, the breakout heuristic. LSD swimming pools again. Good night, those who are going to bed. Yeah, I kind of answered that a bit. I don't remember seeing the question, but I kind of answered that a bit. The LSD hypnosis book. That was LSD, marijuana, yoga, and hypnosis. That's LSD, marijuana, yoga, and hypnosis. Yeah, people don't innately always know everything, but that's where you want to make sure, that's where you're exploring. So I kind of talked about how you kind of are exploring that they know what they want. So I sort of talked about, so I didn't answer it specifically, but I'm going to answer it a bit more specifically now. So instead of just saying, okay, just trust yourself and hope that everything will get better, clearly some people do things where they just don't seem to know a way out of something. So what you want is, have there been exceptions? So it's about a number of the questions. Have there been exceptions to this? Like, if someone's been depressed and they don't want to be depressed, have they ever not been depressed before? Because if they have not been depressed before, then they've got a pattern for how to live life not being depressed. Have they ever been depressed before and then got over it? Because if they have, then they've got a pattern for how to overcome it. They don't consciously have to necessarily know how they did that, but the fact they've got the experience means that they obviously know how to overcome it, because they did overcome it once, at least once in the past. Do they know what they want life to be like? Because again, some people spend so much time focusing on what they don't want life to be like that they've never actually considered what they do want life to be like. So you want to know, do they know what they want their life to be like? And if they just say, well, I know what I don't want, and they won't move into that stage, then I wouldn't do something trying to move them forward until they're at that point where they can move forward. Because clearly you're not going to be able to help them if they're in a place where they're thinking, I don't want this, but I don't know what I want instead, because clearly they're going to keep finding their way back to what they don't want. A little bit like smokers frequently find their way back to smoking when they have therapy to stop smoking, if the therapy was just literally stop smoking. So if someone goes to see a hypnotist who doesn't do therapy, and the hypnotist just says, you'll never smoke again in some way or another, the person ends up smoking again because that was their successful strategy for whatever the reason was that they smoked. Um, and so you want to ask those kind of questions. They don't have to verbalize all the answers to you, though. So if they want to keep the answers private, that's perfectly fine. You'll find ways, if you're experienced enough as a therapist, you'll find ways to ask questions without knowing the answer that they've thought to themselves. You'll ask questions in vague ways, etc. A bit like I do on my tracks, on my videos and things, where I don't know what your inner experience is, and so I'll say things like directing your attention to wondering what the sky might look like what color it is, whether there's any clouds there. So I'm directing your attention to you discovering the information. I'm not telling you what information is there because I don't know it. And if you told me it, so if you said to me, it's a beautiful blue sky with white puffy clouds, I could then talk about it being a beautiful blue sky with white puffy clouds. But if you're on YouTube and you're watching it, you're not there to give me that feedback. So I can't go on and say, and as you look at that blue sky with the white puffy clouds, because you never told me that. So I'd have to carry on with my vague ways of wording things to make sure I don't mismatch what it is that you're experiencing. And obviously you get a lot more information from a client even when they don't say anything, when they're sat in front of you. You can see their face, you can see their body language and what have you. Yeah, so a lot of people do focus on the what I don't want part, and the role of a therapist is to help people to focus on the what I do want part. And this goes, so that was talking about things like depression, anxiety, anger, OCD, addictions, all these sort of things. When it's a physical thing, clearly you don't know how to control certain parts of your body, and yet your body does know how to do certain things. So I don't know, Ellen, if you were around at the point I spoke about it. I mentioned about the fact that in one of these books it talks about and then gives the kind of quote, the sort of reference to it, talks about the scientist that spoke about the epigenetic changes that happen that lead to cancer remission, or they lead to the increase in certain T cells and the increase of those T cells having a focus on attacking cancers. And then the person has a spontaneous remission, nothing to do with the treatment. And that spontaneous remission is because of this change that went on because of this epigenetic change. The person wouldn't consciously know how to do that, but the person's body would potentially know. Most people's body, if they're a normal functioning body or have been a normal functioning body at some point, should know roughly how to do that. It doesn't mean everyone's going to be successful, but they should have an idea of things like that. Likewise with getting rid of pain, the body gets rid of pain all the time, it gets rid of sensations all the time. And so again, that's something that you wouldn't necessarily consciously know how to do that, but non-consciously, within you do know. There are things you can know as a therapist that trigger positive epigenetic changes, etc. So some things you don't necessarily have to know yourself exactly what you want. The most you'll know is, so for example, say there's the AIDS case that Stephen Brooks and Ernest Rossi worked with. The person had AIDS, and I've got both videos, obviously. The first video where he's working with Stephen Brooks, the guy talks about how he's got full-blown AIDS, and to be diagnosed as having AIDS, you've got to be in the final stage of it. So literally, he could die from getting a cold. He could die from literally anything. And so he was asked, "What would you like? How can I help? What would you like me to do to help you? What would be like your goal from here?" And he said, "If my T cell count was doubled, then that would mean that I would be likely to live a few more months. And so just doubling my T cell count would be great." And so that's what ended up happening. That Stephen Brooks worked with him and did a mix of some ideodynamic stuff and giving a lot of suggestions and things as well. And one thing he did was said, "Okay, I want you to give me, I think it was finger signals, to tell me um, when your T cells will have doubled, and so what time period that can happen in." And so I think he then counted and said, like, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, etc. And I think it was 28 days or something. His finger signaled to say it will double by then. The next session was with Ernest Rossi, um, videoed as well, and was with Ernest Rossi, I think 3 months later or 6 months later or something. And he was asked about the previous session. He said, "Yeah, I went to my doctor and my T cell count had doubled, and I now wish that I'd asked for more. If I knew it was going to work so well, I would have asked to achieve more than I'd asked for." And so he then asked Ernest Rossi to sort of do what he could to help him. And Ernest Rossi did the hand movement thing. And the guy ended up living for a number of more years, I think 3 more years or something, giving lectures about improving well-being when you're sort of at the final stages of having AIDS. But he knew what kind of life he wanted, so he could answer kind of what he wanted in his life to be like. He'd think about the type of life he wanted. And I think that sometimes it's, there's no guarantee that any therapy would work, or that, everyone's different. There's no guarantee over how long any therapy will take. So you could do therapy with someone and it could work first session. You do one session and somehow everything clicks. It all works brilliantly. For someone else, you could be, 6 or 8 sessions in before things start to click and work. And other people, you can get 20 sessions in and nothing has changed. And obviously, as a therapist, if you go over like 6 sessions and nothing's changing, you question what on earth you're doing wrong. And you want to have those conversations with your client about what is it I'm doing wrong, because you clearly haven't moved forward and improved. We're now like 6 sessions in. If you haven't improved, what am I doing wrong? What's going on here that means therapy isn't working for you? And you want to explore those, and you want to look at, are you the right therapist? Is it possible for that treatment to work? I've worked with people for things where, like, someone had trying to think of the name of it now. The thing that makes you shake a lot, but not the common thing. The name will probably come to me. But their tongue was starting to shake, and they got told that it's only going to get worse and that it's incurable. Something tremors, essential tremors. That's the one. They had essential tremors, and they said they've been told that it's incurable. It's going to happen for the rest of their life. It's going to get worse for the rest of their life. It's going to start where it is, so like their tongue and their hands a little bit, and it will reach a point where it won't kill them, but it will mean they can't drive because their hands will be shaking so much. They won't be able to talk because their mouth and their tongue will be shaking so much. And could I help them? They said, "I've been told it's incurable. I've been told there's no treatment. And so I just have this fate I don't want in my future." And I said, obviously, I've got no experience treating essential tremors. I've no idea if I can help. I don't know what the research is. I've not looked up the research because until you told me, I didn't know what it was called. I'd never heard of it or looked into it. Um, so I said, all I want to know is, are there times that it isn't as bad or that it's better in some way? And they said, yeah, when I'm relaxed, uh, it's I don't sort of have the tremor as bad. Um, so I said, okay, well, if it's variable, I can't guarantee I can help, but if it's variable, it at least gives me hope that we can do something. Because if it's variable and there are times it's worse and times it's better, then all we need to do is try and figure out how to make it so that the parts of you that tremor or whatever it is that causes it, that's also causing the not so bad part, we need to just help it so that it can do the not so bad thing all the time instead of the bad thing. And so, literally, if someone says to me, it's variable, I think, well, it's worth trying to give this a bit of a go. And I haven't seen her for a couple of years now, but last time I saw her, she still hadn't had any tremoring. Um, and that was maybe 5 or 6 years after I had worked with her. Um, but it was literally a case of the fact that she told me that there are times that it isn't as bad and there are times it's worse. And she was able to then explain what those were. And so, yeah, so that was all I did was kind of said, well, I think I did the hand movement thing and said, well, we'll just see if you're kind of unconscious, non-conscious. We'll see if that part of you can make the changes necessary. You don't have to know how it does it, but we do know that there is a way forward that might be able to help here because there are times it isn't so bad. So yes, that's normally my kind of way of looking at it, that some things might not be curable, but why not give it a go? If the person has asked for that help, I never charged her. I said, I'm not going to charge you. There's no way that I can guarantee. You can never guarantee success anyway. But I said, there's no way I can guarantee that I should. I'm not going to charge you because I've never treated someone for this. There's no scientific research to back up any evidence of why I should try and use this with you. It's entirely experimental. It's not going to cause any harm. I can sort of guarantee that it's not going to cause any harm. I'm just going to sort of be guiding you through a process. And worst case, nothing happens. Best case, something happens. Just having a look. So I'm tempted to anyone who wants to join in to guide you through a process. I know that we're doing it via a computer, and so I can't get feedback. I can't see what you're doing, whether you're engaging or whatever. But at the same time, it's something that if you choose to engage in it, then you can always engage. And if you don't want to, you don't have to. Yes, I remember my dad when he was dying of cancer. Um, the doctors, I was in hospital with him. The doctors did all the checks and said, everything we check you with says that you're dead. And he just looked at them and said, yeah, but I'm not, obviously. I'm not clearly dead. I am sat here. And so, yeah, he was kind of very stubborn, but his blood pressure thing was like, you don't have blood pressure. We can't find your pulse. Everything, all our readings are showing that essentially you're a dead body. Just finishing my very cold coffee first. And then I'm going to move the computer back a bit in a moment. So, yeah, so the idea is, I'm just having a look to see what you've written. What are you referring to about the when you can alter? Let me just read back and see if I've missed something else. When you can alter a person's whole life for the better in a matter of hour, did you ever feel compelled or maybe guilt with not doing it anymore? Was that a question to me? You're just trying to understand it. Um, well, I never felt anything one way or the other. She had said, um, you know, she had come to me for help. I said, okay. Yeah. Well, I said, I can't guarantee anything, but I've not done any research, etc. Everything I've already just said. Um, but if you want to give it a go, I said the only question I had was, have there been times it has been better, and are there times? Is there variability? That was kind of what I was getting at. Is has there been variability in this? Because if there's been any variability, then I'm reasonably confident that it's at least changeable, even if it's not curable. Maybe it can be slow. For example, if she said that the tremors still happened when she relaxed, but they were far less, I would still see that as, well, if we can have it so the tremors are far less and keep you in that state for longer, then maybe we can slow this down and make it so that you don't get the worst of it for a much longer time. The thing there is that there's no guarantee that off in the future, there's no guarantee that I was the one that caused that in any way, which obviously I made clear. It could just be that it was going to happen that way anyway. But yeah, so that it was just a case of I um, did what I could in that session. I didn't. I generally, as a therapist, it's not good for business, but I generally, because you make more money just saying to people to keep coming back for therapy, whether they need it or not. But I generally, as a therapist, just end up saying, feel free to get in touch if you want if you feel you need another session at all. And she never got in touch about wanting another session, but I knew her, hence her, she was sort of within my circle of my life. So I knew that, I knew how things were progressing afterwards. And as I say, for a number of years afterwards, we kept in touch. We didn't see each other regularly, but occasionally our paths would cross, like every couple of years, for about 5 or 6 years. And so I knew that, she was telling me she still looked perfectly fine, didn't have any, she wasn't trembling or anything like she was when she'd asked for help, and when I met her. And she was saying she hasn't had these tremors. So it was it wasn't like I sort of felt any guilt about anything, or um I didn't feel compelled to do anything else for anyone else. If someone else had come to me and asked me a similar thing, um I probably would have asked a similar question. Is it variable? Not that wording, but is it variable? And if they said yes, I would probably recommend they go and talk to someone. I'd probably recommend them to maybe a hypnotherapist that I know or something. And I'd probably say to that hypnotherapist, oh yeah, I've worked with someone in a similar situation. Here's what I did. If that's any help to you, it might inform what you do. It might not, and then leave them to it. So let me move this further away from me. That gap. Don't like seeing a gap on my bookshelves. Hang on a minute. Let me just put things back so that I don't have to look at a gap. that's not its home. Just putting everything back where it belongs. And Darren Brown slots in there. Those books come from over there, so they're okay. Right, I don't have a gap behind me now. Exactly. It's a horrible feeling to see space in your bookshelf. Well, it's a good feeling when you've got lots of books you need to place and you think, oh, where am I going to fit them? Yeah, because the books kind of go all the way up to the ceiling. So anyway, they go all the way down to the floor as well. Probably just making everyone dizzy now, all this movement. Trying to make sure I can be seen well enough to do what I'm doing. Yeah, obviously they are all around me. I'm surrounded by books. Yes, making you dizzy. Snoopy riding his way through. So hopefully you can all hear me okay. My microphone is now kind of twice the distance that it would normally be from me. Under all the cookies. So I'll try not to swing in my chair too much as well. Think about something you'd like help with. So it could be a health thing, mind, body, so mind or body or both thing. It doesn't matter what it is that you want to work on. So for example, a bookshelf that moves. Yes, I have books in front of books, but not a bookshelf in front of books, although I do have a spinning bookshelf there. So for example, if you thought, if only I could be rid of all these health issues, or if only my body would respond in this way to things, or if only I didn't have pain, or whatever it is, think of the thing you'd want. So I was naming there things you don't want because I was trying to point out the bits that you might choose to work on, but think of what it is that you do want. So it could be, for example, for a healthy, efficient immune system. Yeah, just as an example, that does its job properly, and you'll know what that is. So I'm just using a sentence, but you'll know what that is. You'll know what that would mean to you. If it was, say, someone had arthritis, it could be that they want their body to be comfortable and they want their joints to be comfortable and what have you. So you would know better than me. I'm just obviously using words, but whatever it is that would be how you would describe, because you'll know a lot more than the words. The important thing is you know more than the words you use. So if I said, I have I get pains in my arm from following being ran over and having 10 breaks in my arm, and have still got some screws and things in there. And so for me, it could be that I want my arm to be comfortable and to function properly. And I'll know there's a lot more detail than that I know that means, even if I'm using that sentence to explain it. So hopefully that makes sense to you. So it's you want to kind of be able to tell yourself what it is you want rather than what you don't want. But whatever you say to yourself that you want is obviously going to be loaded, packed with a lot of information of what that would mean to you if you actually had that reality appear. And it's got to be something achievable. So, for example, this wouldn't work if you said, I want to be a millionaire, because that's not an achievable goal. You could achieve that, but it's not something under your 100% control. It's not something that you can do something about. So that's another important thing with the goals, that there's a difference between saying, I want to have the motivation to start up a business or something like that. There's a difference between that and I want to be a millionaire. I want to be a millionaire might be something you'd love to have happen, but in terms of actually working towards being a millionaire, clearly that's not the best goal to choose, because what are the steps to take that guarantee that kind of as an outcome? So hopefully that makes sense around the type of thing, the way you approach what it is that you think about, because that'll be very important in terms of whether you're likely to get some result or not, is if you've made it so that it's something that's in your control as a mind or body or whatever, rather than something that someone out, like, you can't sort of say, I want my husband to love me more, or I want my kids to behave, or something. That's the bit that's not in your control. You can say, I want to behave in this way in relation to them. That's in your control. You can't say, I want them to do something in relation to me. So that's kind of how you set your goal of this. Think a little bit about maybe how much you would like that. So in terms of, do you want that? If you said, like, this won't necessarily go for all problems, but as I've talked earlier, if you said, like, now I'm a 9 out of 10 on how bad this is, or 10 out of 10 on how bad this is, think, how much could I live with this problem, whatever it is? So for example, could you live, if you have, say, anxiety, could you live with it being like a 2 or a 3, where sometimes you feel anxious, maybe once every month or once every couple of months or something, that might say, oh, I'm a 2 because every now and then I feel anxious? Could you live with that as an outcome if just occasionally, while you're still getting used to improving and working on things, you were doing that? You were sort of not at the, like, it's not a 0. Can you say you want to get over something or past something? It depends how you're kind of wording it. So say you had a relationship end, you wouldn't necessarily say, I want to get over my ex, because that's not saying what you want instead. You would say whatever's relevant to you. So it could be, like, for me, obviously I don't have anyone I want to get over, but it could be saying, I want to be able to, I want to enjoy my life. I want to be happy, healthy, going for walks, going for whatever it is. So you would say things like that. In relation to forgiveness, again, it's how do you turn that into what it has to be is something that, how I describe it is, if I was following you around with a video camera, how will I know on the video that you've achieved that forgiveness? So that would be the question. If I was following you around with a video camera, how will I know, based on what I see on the video camera, that you've achieved the forgiveness? And whatever the answer to that is, that's what your goal would be, potentially. It would be, what would someone see, hear, and feel, and say to yourself, etc.? What would be going on in real life if that forgiveness has happened? So would it be that you would interact with certain people in a different way to how you do now? Would it be that you would make different decisions, or interact with life differently? So it's whatever it is. And this is the bit that normally takes the longest, is actually trying to form the what is it you actually want part, because it's trying to get to, so, yes, you forgive someone, what has changed in your life now? So yeah, so it's the tangible signs. What has changed in your life because you've forgiven the person, or forgiven, whether, say it was a past thing. So for example, if you forgive someone who's alive now and kicking around, who you might bump into, you might be able to talk about how you would interact with them perfectly fine, etc. If it was forgiving someone who's passed away, for example, then that forgiveness isn't going to manifest in relation to any social interaction with that person, but there would be something happening in your life because of that forgiveness, not, because of not having that forgiveness. So the question is, what is it that's different in your life when you do have that? So it is all about, it is focusing on, like, the miracle question. It's all about what is it that's going to be different for you. What's that kind of video speak thing? If someone's following you around for a reality TV show, what are they following you around and observing that lets them know, oh wow, she's changed her life, this has happened, this is different now. So that's kind of how you want to set your goal. You want to know what it is you want to achieve. This technique is very much a mind-body technique. So if it's something where you just need your body to be taking care of itself, for example, this technique will work well for that. Well, I would go with what you want to achieve, whatever that is. Your body can figure out how far it can go with things and what is possible. For example, if I was that AIDS person in the video, I would go all out and just say, this is what I would love to achieve. So you're not going into it with the expectation that that's exactly what's going to happen, but you would go into it thinking, I'm aiming to get as close to this as possible. So I wouldn't necessarily undersell it, but I'd be thinking, and again, as I say, it's about the fact that the sentence you finally say to yourself, or the kind of way you word it to yourself, will be loaded with so much more information internally than sort of externally. And so sometimes it's harder to put things into words. So it could be, for example, with the AIDS person, that you might say to yourself, I would want to be cured. Ultimately, I'd want to be cured. And if not cured, I would want to have my body doing everything it can to kind of, so this is where you're then adding in, you wouldn't necessarily say this entire thing to yourself because that'd just be too much to be focusing on. But you would know what I mean is, I want to be cured. I'd love that to be the outcome if that's possible for my body. But if that isn't possible, I just want my body to be doing literally everything it can to fight this, to boosting itself up to its maximum strength, to be doing everything it can to help me to achieve wellness, to whatever it is. So you're kind of saying, I just want to get as close to this as possible. But if I can't get a cure, then I can't get a cure. That's, miracles don't always happen. But I'm just striving for something. So I wouldn't necessarily undersell it, but I would accept that you're not necessarily going to get that oversold thing, so to speak, that thing that might actually be unreachable and unattainable. But because you don't know you don't know that that's unattainable. So you may as well say, if it's possible to do this, that's what I'd love. But if not, then I just want to do the best I can to get as close to that as possible, kind of thing. If that makes sense. So once you've got that, the next bit is obviously making sure that you're not likely to be disturbed or need your attention elsewhere. So if you're cooking or doing anything where it wouldn't be safe to follow along to something, given that we are live, make sure you're not following along to this. So only follow along to this if you can actually give this your attention. Obviously, if you're buffering, feel free to pause this for a bit, let the buffer get ahead, or lower the resolution down a bit so that hopefully it doesn't buffer. But yeah, definitely if you're doing anything or there's any reason why you might need your attention elsewhere, deal with that rather than follow along to this, or make sure you've dealt with that and then follow along to this. So we don't want anyone setting fires or anything inadvertently. Just lower that. You can all see my strawberry cup now. So if you're still with me following along, then what I want you to do is rub your hands together, get loads of energy there. Rub your hands together, open them out about maybe head width apart, and just gaze between your hands. Just let your eyes defocus, looking between your hands. And as you begin to relax, continue to just gaze between your hands. And if your unconscious now is willing to begin to work on that internally, and do that piece of work you'd like it to work on. Perhaps you'll notice a sensation between those hands, maybe a tingling, maybe a pressure, almost a pushing or a pulling between those hands. Maybe like energy, electricity almost pulsing through those hands. And just continue to gaze between the hands. And let whatever happens happen. It's about your own personal self-expression, your own inner therapy. So if your unconscious now is willing to begin to make those changes, just allow that to happen now. Let those hands do their thing. And maybe you'll notice that they move together or apart. Or perhaps they stay just where they are. Maybe there's certain sensations, certain feelings. And just allow that to happen all by itself in those hands, letting your mind, body work on that thing on its own in the background. And as you allow that to happen, you can allow your eyes to remain open, or you can allow your eyes to gently close. It's entirely up to you. Whatever helps you feel comfortable while that inner work takes place. Maybe it can be almost like there's a ball of energy between those hands. And as your unconscious begins to work and is doing that inner work, maybe you'll notice the occasional twitch of the fingers, perhaps movement in the arms, the wrists, maybe the elbows. Maybe you'll notice a change in the temperature of the hands. Maybe one hand feels warmer than the other, or one hand feels cooler. As that inner work continues. That's it. And just let that work carry on. And as it carries on, I don't know whether you'll go deeper into the experience and have that work take place internally, more with each in breath or each out breath. And your mind, body can begin to help that to set itself up so that some of this work can carry on when you sleep and dream. And in daydreams, those times where you naturally drift into your mind, update your neurology, make changes through your mind body. That's it. And as that work continues, at some point, the hands can lower down, perhaps to your legs, but only at the rate and speed that those changes begin and continue within you. And while those changes continue within you, and the hands lower down, you can drift deeper and more relaxed into the experience, having your own personal experience, your own self-expression, creating the necessary changes in the mind, the body, right down to each and every gene in the body, into each cell, perhaps even having a sense, visualizing through your body, some sense of those genes changing, turning things on and off, seeing yourself in your new way, maybe experiencing yourself in a new way, experiencing yourself interacting with others, experiencing that you who has successfully completed achieving what you set out to achieve. And a part of you can perhaps begin to get a sense of the time period that that's over, whether it's 1 month in the future, 2 weeks in the future, maybe 6 weeks in the future, maybe it's 4 weeks in the future, or maybe it's some different time, and you can begin to have almost like an intuitive, instinctive sense of how long it'll take for you to achieve what it is that you're working on here. And one of the questions is whether your sense will be correct or not, whether you'll achieve it faster or achieve it when you think you'll achieve it by. And in a moment, I'll go quiet in the background for a little bit. And as I do, you can drift even deeper into the experience. If your eyes aren't closed, perhaps your eyes can close for a few moments. And then you can take a minute to take as long as you need inside to make all the necessary changes for your well-being, for a happy, healthy life, to achieve happiness, health, and well-being within you. And you can always re-listen to this and go through this again, working on the same thing or different things to deepen the therapy. And I'm going to go quiet now as you go inside, drift deeper and deeper. And then when your inner work is done, those hands will be down on your lap. And your eyes will instinctively just begin to open. You'll feel calm, refreshed, and you'll come back to the room. And when you do, you'll be able to let me know in the live chat that you're back in the room, ready to continue. And you can do that now. That's it, coming all the way back as that inner work completes, and you know you can carry on any more inner work when you sleep and dream. So, in answer to Rose's question, um, I don't feel, I wouldn't say I enjoy interacting with people online. Um, I like a lack of interaction, but if I am going to interact, I like to actually have people obviously interacting back. So I don't like a lack of interaction in terms of like me doing a live chat and everyone's silent in the live chat, because obviously that would be awkward. I'd be I'd be wondering why I can see a number of people in the live chat in the sort of up in that corner and no one in in the chat bit. Hopefully you'll all be back in a moment. So yeah, so I do avoid chatting to people live uh, in person, but obviously I do give talks, I do teach and stuff, and all of that involves interaction. And I've always said that if I don't do these things, even when they feel really uncomfortable, then I would just never do them. And I would shut down and essentially be a smelly hermit somewhere under a rock. So I do them even if they make me uncomfortable, purely because I know that the temptation is not to do them at all. For things like these live chats, um, I'm doing them because obviously there's certain events going on in the world, and it's nice to be able to do something to take everyone's minds off things for a little bit and maybe focus on other subjects or other things. Um, find something else to talk about. Try and be a bit helpful to people. Um, not for my benefit of wanting to interact with people, but to try and do something for others. Blink, blink. So, obviously, a process like that is, I would say, vastly more powerful when done face to face, where the therapist is responding to you as an individual, or even, for example, if you're in a group. For when I've taught this in front of groups and I've said to everyone in the audience, "Okay, follow along, engage with this." In a group, I can obviously focus on individuals in that group. So I can, I've talked before about how good the brain is at picking up where communication is coming from. So I can direct my voice at individuals in the group when I say certain things. So, for example, I can look over at someone who maybe has their eyes shut or something. I can look over at someone in the audience and say, "That's it," as they're taking a long breath out. Um, yeah, I'm trying to still remain talking calmer to make sure everyone's back without any kind of mental whiplash. Um, yeah, so even if you're in a group, an instructor teaching the group can look at individuals and respond to individuals where the whole group hears them and just takes it as, because you're being quite general, the whole group hears them and um, just takes it as a general statement, but the person you've directed your voice at feels it as if it's directed at them and feels that that was personal. It was said in time with, say, their breathing or their facial expression they gave or something. Um, oh, how did I make you laugh? Um, so yeah, and obviously people can go back and re-listen to that and follow along again in the future. Um, I think there's probably videos of me doing things like it anyway. There's definitely a video of me demonstrating it with someone in front of an audience, um, so that you can see how it looks or what the experience is for someone who gets it one to one. Um, But yeah, so what I quite like about it, obviously, is that when you're doing it face to face, it just feels like an incredibly intimate uh, experience. It feels like you're both sharing the same world almost for that moment. Yeah, there's not really an induction. It's not. Um, the thing about anything like this and hypnosis in general is not really, at least anything I ever do, there's not really such a thing as an induction. It's about focusing attention. That's all an induction is there for, is to focus attention and increase responsiveness. And so here, what you're doing is, so the closest to the induction is the person rubs their hands together. That focuses their attention. That gives them something to focus on, is the sensations that they experience between their hands when they've rubbed their hands together. So once someone goes like that and then goes like that, and you say gaze between your hands and just notice the sensations there, that's focused their attention. So that's technically the induction, if you wanted to call it that. After that, it's kind of, if you wanted to use hypnosis terms, it's kind of deepening. You're doing a deepening process of having the person, notice whether there's tingling, whether there's warmth, coolness, whether there's movement. Maybe one finger's twitching, maybe other fingers are twitching, maybe it's very stationary, and that takes you by surprise. Um, so all that's then kind of deepening. It's saying pay more attention to this, but don't move your eyes. Keep gazing through your hands and just pay more attention to this, so that you're paying attention to the experience, not to kind of looking at it. It's a bit like, if any of you have seen me do the induction where I say, imagine picking up a pen and putting it down, and I demonstrate, I say, so there's a pen, say it's on a desk. I say, all I want you to do is just imagine reaching over, picking up the pen, sitting back, putting it on your lap, reaching up, reaching over, putting the pen down, sitting back, reaching up, picking the pen up, sitting back. And I just want you to imagine doing that. Whatever you do, don't move. Just imagine doing that process. And because you don't move, you end up very quickly becoming hypnotized. You very quickly end up going inside your mind. And in many cases, people end up doing an arm levitation because their arm has had this continuous feeling of reaching over constantly, that they end up with the arm actually moving. And you've probably all seen my video of me demonstrating that in front of an audience. Um, the same with pain control. That with pain control, if you say to somebody, what I want you to do is describe the pain, but whatever you do, don't move at all. Literally stay totally still and just describe that pain. And again, you hear me talking, but you're not sure what he's saying. That's not a good thing. Let me move this closer now as well. And change that again. So yeah, with pain control, you want the person, one thing you can do is say, sit totally still, don't move a muscle, and now describe that pain in visual, auditory, kinesthetic kind of terms. Like how would you describe what it looks like? How would you describe where it is, its exact location? How would you describe the shape that it is? How would you describe the texture that it is? How would you describe whether it has a sound? If it does, how would you describe that sound? And you have to do the whole thing without moving a muscle. And that obviously then detaches you from the pain itself, because it's no longer about the pain. It's now something separate. It's an entity separate from you, and it's something you can now manipulate. It's turned into something you can change. And I was actually reading. I was actually reading an article earlier about Milton Erickson, and he was obviously one thing he worked a lot on was pain and kind of managing and addressing pain. And one of the things that he said was that he would have his wife, who he found it worked best if he had someone to describe it all to. So he would sit opposite his wife and he would talk about how there's this absolutely terrifying pain, um, like someone's got a bit of wire stabbed through his body. So he's not moving, gesturing. That's the whole point. You don't move, but stabbed through his body, and that wire is, and it's really tempting to move though. Um, so he would talk about this searing hot wire stabbed through his body that's terrifying and causing him this immense pain. And then he would just keep describing that pain from moment to moment. He'd now describe it as he can feel that searing hot wire is moving towards his shoulder, and it's moving here and it's moving there, and now it's on top of his shoulder, and now uh, it's spreading that heat around his shoulder. And so the whole time he's talking about it without moving. He's just kind of remaining entirely stationary, and it transforms the pain, transforms the experience of it, and it puts you into obviously hypnosis at the same time. Um, so yeah, I used to do different practices back as a teenager, rubbing my hands together allegedly to create chi. Um, well, the idea is because I get that. I get people who say it's just annoying or it hurts or whatever kind of thing, but it's about encouraging the person to slow their reality right down, slow right down so that you're able to then delve into it and properly analyze it and properly say, it is this size, it is this height, it is, this shape, it's jagged, it's throbbing, it's, so that you're actually focusing on the sensory parts of it, not on the label of it being pain, but on actually, and there's a document, the Paul McKenna documentary that transformed my life, the one where Paul McKenna said, I'll tell you what people are looking at, I'll tell you what the hypnotist is looking for when hypnotizing someone. On that documentary, one thing they do is this process of, they have one person who um, is just experiencing pain, and one person who's told to focus on um, you know the sort of experience rather than just giving it a label of pain, but on it's this long, it's this color, it's this shape, it's this size, it's this texture, it's moving in this way, or it's static in that area, it's moving in this area, so that you're focusing on all those elements of it, and then they could endure the pain significantly, endure a lot more pain, and for significantly longer, because of the fact that they were experiencing it mindfully now, rather than just as a kind of ongoing thing they labeled pain. There was a US lawyer who um, someone took the stand to say, I was involved in this accident and I want to claim damages for this pain I've been caused. And so the lawyer said, where's the pain worst? Is it like the upper arm, lower arm? Where's it worst on you? Oh, lower arm. Oh, whereabouts in your lower arm? Is it like your elbow, your forearm, your wrist, your hand? Where's it worst? The top part of that lower arm, or the hand area? And they said, oh, the hand area. Oh, so whereabouts in the hand is it worst? And they got it down to the lawyer saying, so what you're telling me is that you have a bit of pain in your thumb, or whatever finger it was, that happens from time to time, and that's what you're trying to claim for. And so the lawyer had managed to get the person to focus on what they were terming as just pain, to start focusing on the experience rather than on just giving it the label, and had managed to then get it so that it was just a kind of throbbing thumb or whatever it was, um, that was intermittent, and so they didn't get much of a payout. And apparently, this lawyer was very good at being able to do this in court, very good at being able to conversationally ask people, well, tell me where the pain is, tell me where it hurts most, hurts least. And then they would manage to get it narrowed right down to something that um, is so small and insignificant that they barely get a payout. So then you got to wonder, are they helping people because they're removing the pain from people, or are they helping, you know, but then the person doesn't get the big payout, or are they helping their clients by avoiding the, by getting everyone to suddenly not feel as bad as they had gone in feeling. Um, but yeah, but it is about kind of learning these things, um, like mindfulness. Yeah, it comes down to being win-win, depending on the motivation of the person wanting the money, wanting the payout. Because there's research that shows that people with PTSD who are wanting to sue someone for the cause of this PTSD, like you've been involved in a road accident, you've got PTSD from that, and you're going to sue the driver because of them running you over. The people who are suing someone don't get better of PTSD anywhere nearly as quickly, so not until after they've got a payout, as people who aren't suing people. And they don't necessarily consciously, obviously, think, I don't want to get better yet. But a part of them has that secondary gain of knowing that as long as they keep having PTSD, um, they are likely to get more money in court. Whereas if they went to a therapist and a week later they don't have PTSD anymore, then they're not likely to get anywhere near as much money in court from that. So it kind of probably comes down to what the motivation is at the same time. But yeah, so obviously with that approach, the idea is about sort of engaging with it, going with the experience and just allowing the experience to happen and getting yourself out of the way, so to speak, getting that kind of chatty part of you out the way, which is why it's so much easier face to face, because face to face you can see if someone looks like they're starting to, if someone's still distracted and still thinking, like it's quite common. um, I would say that, yeah, of course, people get over PTSD. I was about to say, I'm sure most people do, but most people probably don't, depending on the treatment they get. Um, it's reasonably the people I've helped with PTSD. I would say that the actual trauma part, I would say most people are over it in 3 sessions ish as a maximum. Normally 1 session. But there's normally other parts of issues that are going on as well. So, for example, I've talked before about the woman who had agoraphobia, terrified of going outside her house. She had been initially fell over on a footpath and woke up in hospital. Managed to go back out and get back out again. A few weeks later, or a month or something later, she was knocked down on the footpath by a person cycling their bike on the footpath. So, see you later. So, what was I saying? Yeah, so she was then knocked down by a bike on the footpath. She then thought, dangerous to go on footpaths, never going out walking, going in my car. Jumped in her car, got to a junction, pulled out of the junction, and a car slammed into the side of her car, and she ended up in hospital again for the 3rd time, all within the space of about 2 months or something. And so she ended up developing agoraphobia. She had really bad kind of flashbacks just every time she went near her front door. She'd suddenly get flashbacks of being hit by a car and what have you. And she'd feel kind of too terrified to go out. And for about 20 years, she hadn't gone out of her house. She'd got a car parked in the front, out the front of her house that she'd never been in, not been in for 20 years. She could step on her back doorstep, but couldn't step into her back garden. And she could stand behind her closed front door, but couldn't go out of the front door at all. And her son ended up ill in hospital, and that motivated her to seek help. So I went obviously around there, and I went in and helped her with the agoraphobia. And 30 minutes into the session, we went to the beach and we sat and had ice cream on the beach together while talking about how her life can be different. So I still carried on the therapy. That going to the beach was part of the therapy, obviously, to test so that she would know that she's no longer scared to go outside. So 30 minutes in, we're both sat outside the front of outside on the seafront, about 5 minutes walk from where she lived, both eating ice cream, both talking about how life is going to be different now that she can go outside. But she still needed sessions. So that was in 30 minutes, getting her to go outside. That was kind of the easy part. 20 years of not going outside was the hard part, because 20 years of not going outside, this was kind of 2007 or something. She'd not been outside through mobile phones coming in, through kids suddenly on scooters everywhere, through kind of lots of stuff that has happened in that time period. And so she needed help to be comfortable driving again, because she hadn't driven for like 20 years. She needed, and I don't drive, so we had to have me in the back seat of her car while she had a friend of hers who drove sitting next to her, so that if there were any problems, they could then, at worst, they can take over, just jump in the driving seat and drive home. So we had therapy sessions around her driving again. We had therapy sessions around her getting used to the fact that the world is so different outside of her home now. So we had a number of other therapy sessions, but the PTSD was treated in the first 30 minutes of the first session. We sort of worked on it. She went out in the back garden, went out the front, and then I said, "Why don't you come down the beach? It's a nice day." And so we then went down the beach. And that's kind of what has been my experience in most PTSD cases. Living where I live, I'd worked with a lot of people who were traumatized troops. And again, the good thing is they don't have to tell you the details about what caused the PTSD. So it was just a case of they don't have to tell you what caused the PTSD. So you treat it, and they don't have to have told you anything beforehand or during or anything. But pretty much, I've treated people, for example, who have been sexually abused and developed post-traumatic stress disorder because of that, and because of persistent, like lots of sexual abuse over prolonged periods of time. The same with domestic violence. I've treated people for PTSD from prolonged domestic violence over a long period of time. And it's all been kind of the same, that the treatment of the PTSD part has been reasonably straightforward, 1 to 3 sessions ish. Sometimes things aren't as clear cut, but generally, some form of trauma has happened, whether it's a one instance thing or a multiple instance thing. Sometimes it's an instance thing that happened so early, like in childhood, that they don't remember it, but they've always been that way as they've grown up. So you have to work on the bits they do remember. Sometimes it's that you're working on the fact they've been told about something retrospectively. Sometimes things have developed in a different setting. So I've told the story before about the woman who had a fear of, was Australian, living in the UK, and had a fear of flying, which she hadn't developed until some random time since she flew to the UK. So she flew to the UK, no problem. Had flown backwards and forwards dozens of times, no problem. At some point, had flown to the UK, developed a fear of flying, but not when she was on a plane, not from seeing a plane, not from anything to do with planes. And she was due to go flying back to Australia. And it was when she went to book the flight to go back to Australia that she suddenly realized for some reason she had a fear of flying. And she had no idea. She didn't expect to have a fear of flying. She just said, I just went, I thought, right, time to go back to Australia. You know, dozens of times you go backwards and forwards. Time to go back to Australia. She was with a guy from the UK, so they had to keep going out the country every now and then. And so she went to book the flight and suddenly had this panic attack and thought, this is weird. I've not had a fear of flying any flight I've ever had. I've never had a bad flight. Obviously, experienced turbulence and annoyance of being delayed and all things like that, but never had a flight that's caused me PTSD. And yet I'm panicking and having these sudden fear kind of response. And obviously, fortunately, it only took one session to help her. But it was a case of just saying, well, you know, feel that fear now. So sat opposite me, feel that fear now, and imagine a golden thread kind of coming from you back through time, and whatever it settles on, just tell me it. It doesn't matter how much you think, well, that's a bit of a weird thing. It doesn't make sense for it. You know, I wouldn't have imagined it. It doesn't matter about logic. Just whatever that thread settles on, just tell me what that is. And she went to France from London to Paris on the Eurostar, and she said it settled on my trip to Paris, sort of like 6 months or whatever ago. But that seems weird because that's nothing to do with flying, so I don't know why it would be on that. And I said, well, that doesn't matter. It's, you know, it doesn't matter that it consciously seems weird. Just let's explore it and see what happens. So tell me about that. And so her eyes are closed and she's talking me through it. And she said, I'm on the train. It's perfectly fine. You know, it's like a train. You get on the train. And the doors are just shutting. And the doors sound like an airlock. They sort of go and sound like an airlock. And I've suddenly felt panicking, thinking, I feel trapped because of that airlock sound. And suddenly thinking, oh, they sound a bit like planes on the doors on a plane. And I suddenly thought to myself, oh, they sound a bit like the doors on a plane. And now I'm panicking, thinking I'm trapped here as we go under the ocean, and I'm not going to be able to get off now until we're in Paris. And I suddenly panicked about the fact that we're going under the ocean, etc., and that I'm trapped. And so that's what caused her fear of flying, was the fact that she had thought about the idea of flying and the similarity to the sound of the doors at the time of feeling that heightened anxiety of being on the getting on the train. And so we de-traumatized the experience of her going on the train, and she no longer had a fear of flying. So sometimes you get something that's kind of a bit left field. You don't quite know what you're going to do and how you're going to treat it, or you suddenly think, oh, I imagined that this was going to be straightforward because normally it is, and actually this turns out that it's not a straightforward answer. So sometimes you get things that aren't as straightforward, but it's about not putting your judgment on, well, it should be X equals Y. Instead, you think, well, something's caused this, something traumatic has happened. Let's find it, and then let's de-traumatize that traumatic thing. And again, some things, like for example, I worked with someone, I think they're from Canada, around sexual abuse. And it was via Skype a number of years ago. And it didn't take long to actually do the treating the sort of PTSD part, but there had to be a lot of working on, okay, so how do you have healthy relationships? You want to start sort of looking at the, they hadn't had the experience of healthy relationships, sort of with partners, etc. Um, well, if you're one to one with me, I would make sure you're alert and awake, and I'd be bouncing around more, and I'd be moving more and talking a lot more, um, and getting your involvement a lot more to make sure that you're wide awake and fully alert. Um, I'd be bombarding you with questions and things so that you have to keep thinking and answering me. And I'd be doing things to make sure that you don't leave until you feel good. Um, Whereas on here, you're able to sit comfortably wherever you are, and you have to put up with my droning voice. Um, but yeah, so that person was a Skype case, but it was one session pretty much for treating the trauma part, and then a number of sessions for helping her to be able to be comfortable with um interacting. It used to be a case of if a boy touched her, if a man touched her, she would suddenly feel anger towards them and want to kind of clobber them and protect herself from them, even if they were just trying to be loving and they're going out with her by her choice. Her instinctive response to certain touches, or any touches, but certain touches a lot more than others, would be kind of rage and wanting to protect herself from them, even though she logically knew there was no need. So she hadn't got experience of how do you interact with people. Um, and so that's where a lot of the therapy, just because you can kind of normally get rid of the trauma part quite quick, you still end up with normally lots of stuff going on. For example, someone who perhaps was traumatized through war experiences, they may have not had treatment uh, for years because there's not a lot of good treatment out there, in my opinion. And so they may have got into drinking heavily. They may have got into maybe being very depressed. They may not be getting any of their emotional needs met. They may not be in work, or doing anything meaningful in their life that gives them meaning. There's so many issues that could be going on for them that even when you then you get rid of the bit that's kind of underlying it all, that so that they no longer have flashbacks and they no longer feel fear and all these things. But the reality is they still have to sort their life out and get some level of, this is how my life should now be. Now that I don't have the trauma, I've got to rebuild my life trauma free. I've got to um, get myself sort of perhaps improve my communication skills in certain areas, get myself into work, um, get my finances in order, get my um, relationships into a better place, know how to interact with people differently, um, learn some new skills, like communication skills. There's a lot that goes on um, that obviously has to sometimes be looked at, that you just methodologically work through after you've done the kind of PTSD treatment part. So I would say that in most cases, people can be treated. Their PTSD can be treated, and normally the trauma part is quite quick. But that doesn't mean that the treatment is always quick. Sometimes there's a lot else going on, and obviously there are always cases that come at you from an angle that you think, "Oh, I've no idea where to start with this," or whatever it happens to be. What it isn't normally is, like, you'll get clients that say, this is probably the worst case you've ever heard of, or my case is probably the worst case that you've ever dealt with. And people that have claimed that have almost always been wrong. um, it's just that subjectively to them it probably does feel like the worst case that someone could deal with. The same with, like, family work I've done. Most family work I've done, the parents who say my child's probably the worst child you've ever had to try and help fix, they're nearly always wrong. Um, and the behaviors of some of the children, I think I have helped children who have significantly worse behavior than your child, but to them they think that that must be the worst case out there. But yeah, so hopefully I've made sure I stay uh, talking long enough so that everyone's hopefully properly awake and alert enough to get on with their day. Um, and hopefully some of this was interesting. I wasn't necessarily going to go on for 3 hours, 20 minutes, but I thought it was an interesting topic to talk longer about, and also an interesting topic for. I knew before I came on air that I was going to want to ideally, possibly do an actual demonstration rather than just talk about it. I wanted to talk about it, kind of the therapy part in general, followed by talking about some of the bits behind the therapy, followed by actually jumping in and saying, well, let's just guide a bunch of people through it because you're all joining me, so why not? Um, and then obviously I knew I was going to want to talk afterwards to make sure that everyone had hopefully come around a bit more from where they. I didn't want to like do a demonstration and say, right, I'm off now, without giving plenty of time for people to have reorientated a bit. But yeah, I do think the issue of people not, and again, I know people often, the people who like what I do, that doesn't mean you like everything I do, but the people who like what I do enough to tell me, but I like these things, are the ones who largely are joining me here in the live chat now, are the ones who largely join me over on Facebook, uh, are the ones who seem to respect me for more than just you help me to sleep. That might be how people have found me, but the people who join me somewhere like over here clearly are happy to learn more from me or about me than just, oh, shut up, don't care about you being autistic, don't care about mental health, just give me another sleep story, which I do get those comments. And then I just think, well, tough. But yeah, so I do get those sort of comments, and you're not the people who give those comments. So one of my reasons for doing YouTube was the whole people don't often share their problems, so they think they're the only ones. So part of writing Look Into My Eyes, obviously my autobiography right there, was, and making it warts and all, and essentially saying, here's the bad bits about me as well as the challenges I face, etc., was so that people would read it and think, oh, this person goes through this as well, this person has done that, this person has experienced that. So it hopefully breaks down some of that, I'm the only one that has this, so I must have it the worst or something, or I have this but I don't even know what it is. So the number of teenagers I've worked with who have been depressed but they've never heard of depression. Now it's a bit more common to hear of depression, but going back to like 2008, 2007, whatever, and beforehand, they've never heard of depression. And so they wouldn't have any kind of, they don't tell their friends, they don't talk about it with anyone. No parents talk about it, no schools talk about it. So they're depressed alone, and they think, I've got these feelings that terrify me, that make me feel like I don't fit in, like I'm somehow out of sync with reality, and that they're trying to figure out words to explain their feelings, and they think something's wrong with them, and that no one else could possibly be like that, because when you look at everyone else, none of them look like they're feeling like that. And so a large part of what I've always tried to do, and why I used to share things like, here's my experiences with being depressed, here's my experiences of anxiety, here's my experiences of these different sort of challenges, is I want people to just see, well, this guy seems to be willing to just be open and say, look, I felt like this, so others can too. And this is what helped, this is what didn't help, etc. So it had been, a lot of me being on YouTube, for example, had been about me sharing stuff that I thought would be helpful to others in terms of helping others with their mental health, helping others with challenges they're going through, helping others to realize they're not alone because others do experience the same kind of things. And so, it was all that tied into it, as well as helping therapists to hopefully be better therapists. it was helping people who perhaps would seek therapy, or people who might not even think of seeking therapy, to realize that they're not alone and that there are ways forward as well. Because sometimes you can go to lots of therapists and think, I only ever feel worse when I see therapists, nothing will make me better. And that can be very demoralizing. It can be very, yeah, it can kind of take away a lot of hope as well. And obviously, a large part of what I like is to ideally give people a bit of hope rather than take everyone's hope away. Um, so yeah, feel free to go through this again. But yeah, for the whole time the lockdowny stuff, the thing we don't try not to talk about is going on. And I don't remember if I don't think I answered the question that I think someone said was a good question. So I'll answer that just briefly in a moment before I go. Yeah, so I'll definitely keep doing the live things for now. The question is, do I keep doing them after everyone's back to work at normal times, etc.? Because doing them at this time is kind of inconvenient for me. Um, and this is one of the things that stopped me doing this, because I know a few of you have said to me often, oh, it'd be great if you could do live streams or something, just like a live chat. And I've always sort of said, well, it's awkward because of the time differences and that I don't want to be doing them at stupid o'clock in the at night time. Um, but then, my ideal time would be to do it at 11 a.m. in the morning here in the UK. But 11 a.m. is not a good time for most of the people who watch my videos. And so it's trying to find that time where, if I was going to carry them on, that time where it's like people are sort of knocking around, able to watch it and catch it live. Because there's no point being live if, yeah, it's been extended here as well. Um, Being live, there's no point being live if no one joins me in the live chat, even if people say, oh, well, I'm happy to watch it back later or something. I still enjoy it or whatever. The reality is, it's part of what makes it work is the chat part, is me being able to maybe introduce a topic, but largely think, once the chat gets going, a little bit into it, once the chat gets going, that's where I can then, we can kind of talk backwards and forwards, and it can be your chat. Then it's about what you are bringing up that you want to answer. Um, so yeah, so it's just reading. But yeah, so I think the question was, I'm not scrolling back to see it because or else I'll never get to the bottom. But I think the question was something like the current situation and people getting agoraphobia. I do strongly suspect there's going to be a huge amount of that. I've got an agoraphobia track already on my on my YouTube channel, but yeah, I suspect there's going to be a strong part of that. I also have somewhere, I don't know if it ever made. I did a whole bunch of fear of tracks. I think one of them was a fear of getting ill kind of track. So I suspect things like that. But then I don't want to end up posting it because I always post things because I think, oh, that'll be helpful. There'll be people that need that. And I always get you're just trying to, make money off the back of this situation or whatever. And I know people jump to my defense, but I do at the same time think it's annoying. Can't people just accept that if I've shared something because I think it will be helpful, that I just shared something because I think it will be helpful? So I'll probably not end up sharing things like fear of getting ill and stuff like that, purely because it'll probably end up just having people moan, and I then have to deal with responding to moaning comments or ignoring moaning comments. Either way, I have to see the moaning comments. Um, so yeah, we've got another 3 weeks at least here. You're letting me take one day off a week. Um, yeah, obviously, I have thought of things like, do I just get into a habit of like doing say this is going beyond the lockdown situation. Do I get in a habit of saying, right, Monday nights are the meditation creation night, for example, Wednesday nights or whatever, and Friday nights are general chat? Or maybe it's like, do I just do one a week on like a Saturday or something, a day when most people might well be off to watch it or whatever, or a Sunday or whatever? Do I have like a day of the week where I just say that's the day and just do it one day a week once it gets out of this current period? Um, it would probably depend on things like what time of day would work for most people. Um, this time of day, when when a lot of people aren't working because of the current situation, or able to be home because of the current situation, um, doesn't seem too bad. Especially if I do 3 hours, it seems that in 3 hours, those who aren't around at the beginning of the 3 hours are normally around at the end of the 3 hours. So if I did like an hour but later, sort of 9 p.m. UK time or something, I'm betting that that would not probably be too bad for people. But yeah, so it could be like I do once a week. So I also have to try and think about how it fits in with my other videos, because there is the tendency that too many notifications to people and they get annoyed. And notifications, YouTube doesn't like notifications near each other. So for example, doing this say on the Wednesday at 7, no, on the Tuesday at say 7:30, 8 o'clock ish, and finishing, people will potentially see this video then. When it goes live, when it's ended and it goes live as just a normal video, say I finished it, say it was an hour long, and I finished it at 8:30, and YouTube processes it and sends it out to the YouTube land by say 9 p.m. Because I have my main video that goes live at 4 a.m. on the Wednesday, YouTube would treat it as the 4 a.m. one, as we can't show that to people so much because that channel has already released a video just kind of 6 hours or whatever, 7 hours, 8 hours, I don't know, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 hours earlier. So YouTube would treat it as this channel has already released a video 7 hours earlier. We've already put that into the pipeline to go out to, for everyone to see this channel's video for today. And then 7 hours later, another video pops up. So I've noticed that, for example, this week's live story, this week's sleep story, hasn't done as well as view wise as previous week's stories, because of the fact, or most likely, at least contributed to, because of the video going live just 7 hours or so. Well, closer than that, because I don't know how long the Tuesday one was, but whatever time the Tuesday one ended, that was quite close to then the one, that week's one going live. So I have to try and think of that as well, that it does impact on my normal videos as well, because of things going live too close to each other. Yeah, I wouldn't want people to be watching me at 11 a.m. UK time if they should be asleep. There's no point having a sleep channel if everyone stays awake to watch me overnight. See, I don't mind carrying on the live ones now. That's not a problem to me, because obviously I'm in control of me. So at any point, if I think, nope, not going to happen, I need a rest, I'm just going to say, it's not going to happen. I need some time off. I need a few days off. And I know that, well, even if people cared, I wouldn't care. um, so yeah, so it would just be, if I felt that I needed the time off, I just wouldn't do it. Or if I felt like it was taking too much of my time, I would either not do it, take days off, or do it, but I would then be very strict on things like keeping the streams to like an hour or whatever. And I would just be very strict on that, because I'd be treating it like if I was doing therapy and I'd said the therapy session was an hour, I would do an hour. What money do I make off it? Yeah, if I was doing this for the money, I wouldn't be. So, for example, right now, I've technically worked for 3 hours and 35 minutes. And this video will probably make, I don't know, say across a month, the first month, which is the busiest month for any video, will probably make about $2, maybe $3 if I'm incredibly lucky. Um, so that would be maybe $1 an hour that I will make for this video. So I'm not obviously doing these videos for the money. And then after that month, normally videos pretty much drop it, especially these sort of videos, drop into obscurity. Um, so I'd be lucky to just make a few cents after that. Yeah, I'm not very good at being told to take days off. Just having a look down. I will go in a minute because it has been a long one, but yeah, Abby has shared some footage of the crisps that I made today somewhere. I think on her Instagram, maybe. So feel free to go follow her on Instagram. I think if you find her website, abbychic.com, it probably has a link to it from there. Yeah, some people I think just don't like love stories, but that's why I say it contributes. I think it probably contributed, not the entire thing. Yeah, as I say, I don't want people to be up though during the night when my sleep stories could be helping you to sleep, rather than, oh, I stay up all night to watch Dan do live streaming, and then I listen to Dan's sleep stories to try and get me to sleep. So let's just have a look. So anyway, I am going to go now because it's been nearly 3 hours 40. And thank you all for joining me here. And feel free to go and listen back to the thingy. If anyone finds the timestamp for it, feel free to share that, and I can, because I won't know it off the top of my head. And yes, I will see you all tomorrow, hopefully for a shorter one, but I won't do a therapy thing probably tomorrow. So thank you all for joining me here. See you later.